Chapter 81, Flustered, 3. Currently, Kale was inside Latana's tent. He had slept in for the first time in a while before slowly walking over. Latana looked at Kale before starting to speak. Bin. One of her subordinates moved to stand in front of Kale at her calling. He had met Kale inside the cave. The novel had given Kale information about Bin, one of Latana's most loyal and strongest subordinates. Bin will guide you to the location. Latana handed Kale a document. Kale had to work hard to maintain his expression once he got the document. Miss Lena, you can't do this. This is too much. She could see that Kale seemed to be bothered by this and starting to smile, thinking this person really was a very good person. No, it is not too much at all. The document Kale received had Latana's name and thumbprint stamped on it. It would be a complete contract as soon as Kale signed it as well. There was one other spot that was left unfilled in addition to the spot for Kale's signature. The location of the land and size was missing. Latana started to speak. It is complicated if it is someone's personal property in the section, but if it isn't, I will take care of everything, so have as much as you want. Everything she said sounded like angelic singing to Kale. The sound of money flowing in was always beautiful. Latana was a generous person. How can you give me a contract like this? What if I said I want the entire shoreline or something? I knew you would say something like that. But it does not matter. Take it if you would like. She really was the type to pay back gratitude as best as possible. Kale realized why Latana was sending Bin with him instead of someone like one of the chiefs or advisors. I guess she is really planning on giving me whatever I want. Kale put on a helpless expression. I think having a lot of land is just cumbersome. I just need a small enough area for me to rest whenever I get a longing to see the jungle. This made Latana think about how she could pay back this extremely good person. Kale must have told his crew to help, as his subordinates had woken up early to help with the restoration of Section 1. Of course, Kale had woken up late and did not know what his crew was doing. Mr. Kale, may I know your family name? Kale suddenly felt chills on the back of his neck. He had a bad feeling that he might end up in a complicated situation if he made the wrong move. That was why he answered back on reflex. I just wish to leave quietly. Let's forget about what happened yesterday and just look toward the future. You really are not giving me any way to pay you back. In Kale's opinion, there was no need to pay him back. Nothing she could give would be worth more than the magic stones. They were not low or mid-grade magic stones but a load of the highest grade magic stones. They were all already refined as well. Kale had no idea who buried all of them in the jungle, however, the novel explained that it had been hundreds of years. That meant that there was no owner for these magic stones. Latana looked out the tent and started to shout. 10. 10. The Black Panther. Grr. Please take him with you. 10 will find the quickest path for you. Kale turned around after getting the chills. He couldn't tell whether the panther was smiling or smirking, but it was revealing a fang that was the size of Kale's arm. 10 seems to be happy to guide you, Mr. Kale. You can ride him. Since this is a token of my appreciation, please accept at least this much. I will. Grr. The Black Panther approached Kale like it was happy. Kale dodged to the side. However, he was on 10's back a moment later. Latana was amazed. This is the first time 10 has crouched down for anyone else but me. 10 is really a good judge of character. I see. Kale didn't feel welcomed while hearing the Black Panther growl. It was fine when he was on here with Latana since he was with the Panther's master. Sitting on 10 on his own felt like he was putting his face into a tiger's den. Young Master Kale, we will follow you soon. Kale nodded his head at Rosalind's words. I leave it to you. The only people going with Kale were Locke, Bin, and Beecrox. Of course, Rayon was following them while invisible, as usual. Not a problem. We will help with the restoration until Mr. Hans and On show up. Then we will head over as well. Kale had asked Rosalind and Choi Han to wait for Hans and the children who were recovering the remains of the lost people. I can't have Rosalind there with me. Rosalind was a great mage. It would be complicated if she ended up finding the magic stones. Then let's go. The rest of the group urged their horses forward at Kale's statement. All of them had a lot of stuff on their horses. Have a safe trip. Thank you for everything. It was nothing. Kale gently responded to Latana's goodbye. He could not let his guard down until the end. See you again next time. What a terrible thought. If he was to see Latana again, there was a very good chance that it would be on the battlefield. That was why Kale had no desire to see her ever again. He just responded back with a smile. 10, shall we go? Kale respectfully asked the Black Panther, who then started to move. The horses followed beside him while Latana watched him from behind. Are you okay, Your Highness? I'm fine. She quietly responded to her subordinate's question. The Black Panther 10 was the first life she had ever saved. Since then, they had always been together. Although it was only for a short time, this was the first time that Latana had ever left 10 with someone else. 1. Kale did not know about this as he headed toward Section 1 on 10's back. The jungle people all stopped moving and greeted him when he went by. Each of them had their own way of doing it, but they all bowed to Kale in one way or another. Latana must have said something, as there was no fanfare or very passionate responses. It really is best to leave quickly. Take action and then leave as fast as possible. Kale realized that really was the best way to avoid annoying things as he quickly headed to the black ash remains of Section 1. Kale got off the Black Panther's back. He could hear Rayon's voice in his head. Wow. There really is nothing here. There was nothing left in the Section 1 shoreline. Even the sea is black. The sea by the shoreline really was dyed black by the ashes. Kale just quietly looked out toward the sea and the scenery. A cool yet salty breeze blew by his side. The Queen's subordinate, Bin, who came with Kale, observed Kale's actions. The Queen had told him to report everything Kale did. I bet this was a really beautiful place. The subordinate flinched at Kale's statement. It was the truth. It really used to be a beautiful place. The sun will set soon, so can I look around a bit? I'll let you know once I decide on the plot of land. I understand. It was almost time for the sunset. Kale patted Locke's head as he started to whisper. Play with 10 for a bit. Don't follow me. Yes, sir. Locke now listened without asking questions. Kale headed toward Beacrox, who was standing there with a frown. He didn't like all of the ashes in the area. Beacrox, who had not taken off his white gloves for a couple days now, started to speak as soon as Kale approached him. I will keep that Bin Orbi or whatever his name is occupied. I knew you'd understand what I want. Kale then followed up with an unexpected question. Beacrox, have you been to the Roan Kingdom's northwestern region? I have not. Really? Don't you want to take a look? I must take care of the Henitus Estate's kitchen. Beacrox looked toward Kale with a confused expression as Kale started to smile. He needed a torture expert soon. He needed someone for physical torture and mental torture. Beacrox was the best when it came to physical torture. The mental torture can be done by the crazy priestess, who is probably with the eldest son of Marquis Stan right now. Kale patted the still confused Beacrox's shoulders a few times before heading toward the highest hill in the area. The Black Panther and Ben watched him for a bit, but they soon had to deal with Locke and Beacrox. That was why Kale's steps were very light. No, it was very light as he was thinking about the magic stones. He felt the same way when they found the Magic Tower's liege's room. Every time he became a step closer to a slacker life, Kale's heart jumped with joy. Weak human, you look very excited. Rayon was correct. Kale was excited. He verified where everyone was located before heading toward the highest point by the shoreline. He headed to the top of the hill. Only ashes were left here after the fire. Ah. Kale started to smile at Rayon's response. The magic stones were found by chance in the novel. This place was normally filled with tall trees such that you couldn't tell what was underground. However, once the trees all burned down and left behind only ashes, the magic stones were revealed when the ashes and dirt happened to flow away due to the rain. Maybe about here. Human, there is something 5 steps to the left from here. Kale took 5 steps to the left following his amazing navigation system. The black dragon was omnipotent. Dragons had the greatest sense for mana in the world. Kale moved to the spot Rayon mentioned and crouched down. He then took out the small hoe that he had used when he earned the sound of the wind. Dig. Dig. The hoe dug through the black ash and dirt. The ground was a bit mushy from the rain and thus was easy to dig. However, Kale cautiously dug like it was the most precious thing in the world. And then, finally. Wow! Kale couldn't help but let out a gasp of admiration. He found a very average-looking but large metal box. However, that rusty box looked colorful. Kale worked hard to dig around the box. Human, why are you working so hard? I've never seen you work so hard before. Kale ignored Rayon as usual and continued to dig until the opening of the box appeared. It was so big that he needed to move as quickly as possible to finish before sunset. He was excited. All you had to do was ask me to clean it. Kale stopped for a moment. I will take care of it. PSSSSSST. A small noise was made as black manna floated in the air and got rid of the dirt and ashes. Kale realized that he had been too excited. He took a breath to calm himself before pointing to the lock. Break it. All right. The lock was easily broken. Kale took another breath before slowly grabbing onto the lid of the box. Highest grade magic stones. Money was good, but this was a precious ingredient for his sturdy and safe sweet home and sturdy transportation vehicle. He would put these ingredients to use until he died. He slowly opened the lid. Screech, clung. Kale let out a noise of excitement. All sorts of vibrant colors appeared in front of his eyes. These magic stones had not changed at all, even after hundreds of years. The colors of these highest-grade magic stones were very vibrant and beautiful. The corner of Kale's lips started to twitch as it went up. Oh! Good stuff. Human, we found another treasure. Rayon removed his invisibility and landed next to Kale. He then tippy-toed to look inside the box. Rayon's actions made Kale look around to make sure no one was around before he lifted up a magic stone. These bundles of money. The magic stones used in the magic devices from the Whipper Kingdom were usually low or middle-grade magic stones. That should give one an idea about the worth of these highest-grade magic stones. Someone at the level of the royal family would use high-grade magic stones. The worth of these magic stones would go up based on how severe the wars became. There were all sorts of places he could sell these to. Crown Prince Elberu would definitely be one of his biggest buyers. Human. Rayon lifted his head up from the box to look at Kale. His wings were fluttering. I want some too. Kale flinched before deciding to be generous. He then patted Rayon's head and pointed to the box that held a couple hundred highest-grade magic stones. I will give you the one you like the most from there. Really? Thank you, human. You are a very good person. Kale was happy to see that this 4-year-old was excited to get just one of these magic stones. So, hide it well in that spatial dimension of yours. Got it. All right. The seed and one magic stone are mine. Sure. Rayon was making sure to follow up with details like a proper dragon. Kale wondered if this was Rayon just getting used to the world as he watched the sunset for a while before heading back down to the shoreline. The still setting sun made a beautiful image behind Kale. He put a gentle smile on his face as pointed to the hill and started to speak to Ben. I could see the sunset well from the top of that hill. Can I get a small plot of land up there? Of course. Ben was amazed after seeing the size of the land Kale was asking for. It was just large enough to fit a small villa. Kale kept his copy of the contract as he started to speak. I'll just stay here until the rest of my group gets here. Ben, Beacrox, and Locke quickly unloaded the supplies and put up the tents. Kale was going to wait for the others at this location. 1 week later, everyone had gathered together. Kale, who had been laying on a chair by the shade created by the tent, opened his eyes once they gathered. Shall we head back? Deputy Butler Hans couldn't help but think Kale was his usual self as he stepped forward. He didn't know Kale meant the Henitus territory when he said, head back. Are we heading back to the Whipper Kingdom? Then why would I tell you to come here? Then where are we heading back to? It was not just Hans. The others also became confused at Kale's relaxed demeanor. However, only one person, the only person left to bid farewell to Kale, Ben, was quietly listening. Kale sat up on the chair and pointed to a location. The group could see that he was pointing to the sea. Oh. Maybe. Rosalind looked toward Kale with a questioning gaze. Kale started to speak as everyone looked at him. This is the sea. At that moment. Boo. He heard the sound of a horn in the distance. A single ship was heading toward the group. They were familiar with the ship, as it was the same ship they had taken to get to the Whipper Kingdom. Are you leaving now? Yes. Thank you for everything. Kale and Ben casually chatted with each other. He walked past the group who were looking at the ship and headed toward the shore. Young Master Nim. At the head of the rapidly approaching ship was Billows, who was waving at Kale. Kale smiled at the excited Billows and shook a magic bag in return. Once the ship stopped near shore, Billows took a small boat and headed toward Kale. Here. Haha. Thank you very much. Billows was extremely happy after receiving the second bag of magic devices. Kale turned around to look at the group, who were all also looking at him. Let's go. At that moment, he heard a vicious voice in his head. Human, is it now time for my revenge? It was Rayon. Kale nodded his head. He climbed on board and felt the cool breeze before blinking his eyes. The ocean breeze was very nice. Kale was heading back to the Henitus territory, his hometown. Welcome back. Count Deruth warmly welcomed Kale back. Kale, who had returned quietly without informing Deruth that he would be back, immediately headed to the Count's office to report to his father. It is thanks to you worrying about me that I returned safely. It's good to see that you don't seem to be hurt. Deruth was thankful and happy to see that his son had come to find him first. However, he then had an odd expression on his face. His gaze moved to the bottom left side of Kale. And who is this? Greet. Kale bluntly spoke, and a loud voice rang through the office. Hello, nice to meet you. Mueller seemed to have eaten well the last few days, as he looked much better than when Kale had found him in the tower. My name is Mueller Hahn, the successor to the Hahn family that has specialized in construction and development for over 200 years. I will do my best with any task you give me. It was a very loud introduction. Deruth was confused. Construction. Development. He looked toward his son with confusion. At that moment, Kale called out to him. My lord. Kale did not call Deruth father, nor even count. That action made Deruth become serious as well. Kale was now addressing Deruth as the lord of the territory. I heard that you were reinforcing the castle walls. I'm sure you have a reason for it. Deruth had been reinforcing the castle walls starting around when Kale had headed to the capital. The reason for that came out of his son's mouth. I believe you expect that the era of wars will start soon as well, my lord. Kale could see his father's eyes turn cloudy. Kale pushed Mueller in front of him. This guy is the descendant of the family that built the magic tower. Kale could see Deruth flinch. Castle reinforcement, magic tower, Kale knew Deruth had understood. Father. Kale spoke to his father, Deruth. Let's give it a try. Chapter 82, We Meet Again. 1. Give what a try? Deruth asked, even though he already knew the answer. Kale was naturally aware of this. Father, what are you afraid of? Deruth could not answer the sudden question. However, his son responded after a moment. I am afraid that we will get hurt. Deruth's eyes became cloudy. It was the same. The thing he feared was the same as his son. No matter how selfish it may be, Deruth was scared that his territory and his family would get hurt. I'm sure that you are aware of how the Western continent's state of affairs is ready to blow up. There was no way that the noble who suddenly started to reinforce the castle walls and invested in a naval base would not know. The Henitus territory did not get involved in any wars until the end of Volume 5. However, there was no guarantee that it would remain that way. I will only tell you this. The reason that the Crown Prince sent me to the Whipper Kingdom is related to something. Kale deliberately said it this way because doing so would prevent Deruth from asking Kale more about it. He would not question something from the Crown Prince. Kale said one word to Deruth. Northerners. Deruth and Mueller both flinched and looked toward Kale. The Northerners have created an alliance. What? Count Deruth started to frown. Kale understood Derutha's reaction. This was important to the Western Continent's state of affairs. There were 3 kingdoms in the north. The Perrin Kingdom was located farthest north. The Guardian Knight of the Perrin Kingdom wanted to lead his Knights Brigade to the fertile lands of the south. Deruth rubbed his face and sighed as he started to mumble. It is not the Whipper Kingdom or the Magaru Empire. Kale was internally full of admiration. Although their territory was located in the corner, Deruth was aware of the Whipper Kingdom, as well as the Magaru Empire's desire to become the control tower. Why would the Empire want to be the control tower? That was because the East and the North were changing. Kale, how are the Northerners going to cross the gorge? There is also the Forest of Darkness. Of the 5 forbidden regions, there was just one that was not a complete mystery. However, the shape of that area made moving large numbers of people almost impossible, making people add it to the list of forbidden regions. The Gorge of Death. As the name indicates, this gorge, that was the most dangerous in the continent, became the dividing line between the north and the central regions of the continent. At the end of that line was the Forest of Darkness. That was why it was difficult for the north to come down to the central region. However, Kale, the Empire, and even Crown Prince Alberu knew about a different method. Father, there are more ways than just the ground. At that moment, he heard a voice. Ship. It was Mueller. The dwarf and rat half-breed quickly took off his backpack with a pale expression. There were 2 rolls of paper sticking out of the backpack. One was the blueprint for the castle, the other was of the ship. Kale nodded his head at the chaotic 30-year-old who was looking back and forth between Kale and the paper. Yes. Ship is an option. Sigh. Deruth let out a deep sigh and sat down on his office couch. Kale went over to sit down on the opposite side. But a ship is not the only method. There was something Kale knew about that neither his father nor the Crown Prince knew about. Why would the other 2 kingdoms ally with the Perrin Kingdom? The Guardian Knight of the Frozen Kingdom that emphasized one's skill in martial arts had brought to reality something from the legends. A Wyvern Knight Brigade. They had found a way to dominate the sky. This brigade gave them a method to cross through both the Gorge of Death and the Forest of Darkness without any issues. Other than a long-distance levitation magic that someone at Rosalind or Rayon's level could use, this was the best you could find. Starting that moment, the 3 kingdoms start to stealthily build ships to dominate the sea as well. They had been at this for 5 years already. It would all come to fruition in less than 2 years. Why would Kale have agreed to help the Abar territory build a naval base? It was because the North's invasion was not far away. Around that time, a future that Kale doesn't know about would start. I'm just worried because this novel was a Munchkin novel. The Birth of a Hero was definitely a Munchkin novel. It was the type of story where an egg would suddenly turn into a chicken when you turn the page. 1. Kale needed to prepare in order to survive in such a world. Kale. Yes, father. Count Deruth started to speak after a long time. He looked directly at his son. I trust your words as your father, however, as the lord of this territory, I must verify whether your statements are true or not. I'm sure it will not be easy to verify, as you heard it from the Crown Prince. Kale knew it would be difficult. Kale knew about it because he had read about it in the novel, but it was not something any average noble could know about. Even so, Deruth would work as best as he could to figure it out. I will try to verify it as quickly as possible. If your father does not have what it takes to find any information out, I will choose to trust your words. Deruth got up and headed to his desk. Son, there is something I've come to realize as I started to touch money. The Hennitus family has gathered money for generations. Of course, they spent money as well, but it was minimal compared to the money they gathered. It was to the point that Count Deruth has never thought that he has ever spent a lot of money. He shared his findings with his son. What I learned is that if you find a place to use your money, you have to spend a ton of it. Money does not help much during wartime. However, the results made by money prior to war will become useful during the war. I will contact you soon. Yes, that is good enough. Deruth called out to his son, who casually responded and headed toward the door. Kale. Yes, father. Deruth recalled the conversation he had with Basin as Kale turned around. Have you ever thought about the issue of our successor? Not at all. Kale answered seriously without a second of hesitation. Deruth started to laugh after hearing Kale have the same response as Basin. Yes, there is no need to think about it. Yes, father. He was definitely not planning on thinking about it. If it came up in the future, he was planning on saying he declines the position. Most importantly, there was no need to think about it since Count Deruth should remain as the lord of this territory for at least the next 15 years. Basin came to me and said he will not do anything to worry you. Of course. Basin will be great for our territory. Basin was a perfect fit for the next lord of the territory. Sure. Go get some rest. Kale verified that Count Deruth looked happy before smiling and heading out of the office. Excuse me, young Master Nim. What is it? Mueller looked around before cautiously asking. Is the reason you are building the castle and ship because of what you discussed in C-. Yes. For that reason. Kale cut Mueller off so that he doesn't need to listen to a long rambling and answered. His goal was to build that castle and ship to safely avoid the war. He did not want to fight. They called life a continuous war, but he didn't want to live in a real war. Just treat it as you are building a domain to prevent us from dying. Mueller's eyes became complicated. Kale put a gift on Mueller's neck. It was a golden necklace. Then you will live to get more presents like this. I will definitely make a safe place to prevent us from dying. Mueller turned the most pale when he was in front of Kale, even more so than when he was around the kittens or the dragon. Kale was satisfied with Mueller's confident answer. Giving presents and being nice really was the answer. 1 week later, Count Deruth had a look of disbelief. I couldn't find any information about the North. The reason for not being able to gather information even with money meant that it was precious information that could not be purchased with money or that it did not exist. Deruth picked the former. I have a ton of money piled up anyways. There was only so much you could save. Deruth started to speak to his son as if he had expected this to happen. Son, let's give it a try. Kale started to smile. He then turned his gaze to the side. Deruth had not called just Kale over. Although their youngest sibling Lily was still too young to get involved in the dealings of the territory, it was possible for one other person. I will work hard as well, young Nim. Good. It is where you, our parents, and Lily will live. Let's give it our best. Kale didn't include himself because he was planning on retiring to a small village in the future. Basin vigorously nodded his head. Yes. I want to live working for our family and the territory until I die. Kale, who only cared about living for himself, just nodded his head at Basin's statement. Right after this moment, a secret document with the golden turtle crest was delivered to the necessary parties. A plan that would take a minimum of 1 year and a maximum of 2 years was starting. Kale, who was observing the starting point for that plan, still looked lost. Is he really half dwarf and half rat? Ahem, yes I am. Mueller went and stood on top of a chair and let out a fake cough as he responded to a construction worker's question. Oh, my lord. Your dexterity must be amazing. Amazing. The meticulousness of the rat tribe and the dwarves' technical skills. We want to see your skills. Mueller's shoulders were moving up and down with joy. Kale was secretly watching Mueller's meeting with some of the territory's construction workers. Countess Violin was next to him. They are all talented and know how to keep their mouth shut, so we should be able to trust them. We have created all of the contracts as well. Since Violin was in charge of all of the artists in the territory, construction could not be missing from the group. The developers that Violin meticulously selected were the best of the best, experts in their field. Even these 2 experts were currently amazed by Mueller. The family that developed the magic tower. I am disappointed that we cannot show off such a talented individual to other people. I know, right? My God, I never thought I'd be able to see a dwarf at work with my own eyes. Please take good care of us. Ahem, ahem. Mueller let out multiple fake coughs. I am 30 this year, but I have 29 years of experience. I have been looking at blueprints since I was 1 year old and held a hammer in my hand since I was 5. This is typical of both the rat tribe and the dwarves. Kale scoffed at Mueller's words. He had never seen Mueller looking so confident. He was even wearing his best clothes with the golden brooch. It was at that moment. He should be easy to handle. Kale relaxed after hearing Violin's observation and started to speak. Please take care of Mueller. Sure. You don't need to worry. Violin's cold gaze headed toward Mueller. They say that a fox becomes king when a tiger isn't around. Mueller did not know about any of this as he acted like a king. Will you go after verifying the blueprints? Yes. I will return as quickly as possible. All right. Kale just responded to Violin's worried expression with a smile. He had to leave here again. Kale took care of the things he needed to take care of before he returned to his room and laid on the couch. He peeked toward Choi Han, who was across from him, and started to speak. Choi Han. Yes, sir. Let's go. We have only been here for 4 days. We are going already. Choi Han continued to speak. I will gather everyone. No. There was a reason Kale had only called Choi Han over. Only we will go this time. At that moment, the existences that always resided in Kale's bedroom revealed themselves. Mio. It has been a while since it has been just us. Hong and An lightly jumped off the bed and approached Choi Han. I will naturally go a well. Rayon removed his invisibility and sat down on the table next to the couch. Choi Han looked around at the team when he heard Kale's voice. Beacrox will follow us later. However, we will first move with this group. There is something we need to take care of with just us. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Is it Marquis Stan and company? Choi Han really was a smart guy. Kale started to smile. I knew you were sharp. Get ready to go. This was the team that originally met and rescued Rayon. They had gathered together to move for the dragon once again. That night, a basic carriage without any crest on it stealthily left through the back door of the Count's estate. It was heading toward the northwest region of the Roan Kingdom. Chapter 83, We Meet Again. 2. It was a pretty long journey from the Henitus territory to the Stan territory located at the center of Roan Kingdom's northwest region. Human, can't we hurry over with teleport magic? That was why Rayon was constantly asking if they could just use magic. Rayon's ability seemed to exponentially grow after being around Rosalind for a while. Kale remembered what Rosalind had said to him. A dragon really is the best, even before their first growth. His abilities and learning speed are both scary. Dragons live very long lives. That is why there was still a lot of time before Rayon's first growth phase. Of course, the first growth phase could come earlier if a dragon receives some type of shock or a dragon desperately seeks power. Dragons go through a total of 3 different growth phases. The first growth phase had minimal changes on the physical body. The second and third growth phases were where their bodies explosively grew, making them become a 20-meter-long adult dragon after the third growth phase. On the other hand, the first growth phase focuses on the internal aspects of the dragon. It could be considered setting the foundation for the second and third growth phases. Kale looked toward Rayon, who was rolling the large, circular glass egg on the side of the simple, yet pretty large carriage. Kale's gaze made Rayon shout once more. Human, teleport. We'll have to wait, even if we got there right now. Kale's indifferent answer made Rayon scrunch his nose before turning to focus on the seed inside the glass egg. It was the glass egg and seed they had found in the magic tower. Rayon only used magic to decrease the size of the glass egg in order to become closer to the seed. He was working hard to grow it and observe it. But Kale Nim. Kale, who had been thinking about taking the seed away from Rayon as soon as it started to grow, turned toward Choi Han, who called out to him. Is that plan really possible in the Stan territory? Choi Han had to also listen to Rayon's revenge plans as a lullaby for the last few days. Although he was only 4 years old, the dragon used vicious words like detention, violence, and torture. However, they were all things that Rayon had experienced for the first 4 years of his life. Why? You don't like the plan? Rayon quickly turned his head to look at Choi Han after hearing Kale's question. However, the response that came out of Choi Han's mouth was simple. No, I think the plan is passable. I am just wondering how we can deal with Marquis Stan and Venian Stan. Rayon started to frown after hearing that his plan was passable. Kale didn't know that Rayon was contemplating new ideas about how to make this more dramatic as he started to speak. The newly recovered Taylor Stan is currently increasing his influence in the Stan territory. Taylor Stan, who had recovered the use of his legs through the help of the Crown Prince, was increasing his influence at a scary rate. The Crown Prince's assistance played a big part in this, however, Taylor's own skills and new health played important roles as well. And Taylor had done something Venian would never even think about. Taylor had pointed his blade at the current lord of the Stan territory, Marquis Stan as well. His influence is not only inside his family. Some of the Northwest nobles have chosen to trust him. Choi Han really was a smart person. Kale nodded at Choi Han, who quickly understood what he meant. Even the number of subordinate families who prefer Taylor Stan has increased as well. They probably felt like they could live at least a slightly easier life under Taylor. In the past, Taylor's weak body made them feel like he would bring down the glory of the Stan territory. However, that weakness had disappeared, and Taylor had also pulled in the Crown Prince. That was why people were slowly starting to trust that Taylor could be the next Marquis. Of course, Kale didn't know too much of the details. He had not contacted the crazy priestess Cage nor Taylor for a while. He just asked the Crown Prince for a general overview of the situation. The Marquis is just allowing that to happen. He would no longer be the lord of the territory if he stopped Taylor. Choi Han became confused. Kale started to explain how the Marquis family was able to become known as cruel and cold but efficient. The Stan family's motto is pretty much, survival of the fittest. They believe the successor has to be the strongest child. Once they officially become the successor, they must kill their own siblings. For the Stan family, strength did not mean physical strength nor intelligence. The strongest was the one who survived. The Marquis had not done anything, even when Venian had destroyed his brother's legs. The Marquis killing that strong candidate simply because he is strong when Taylor Stan has not done anything publicly to kill him. The Marquis could only sit back and observe as he increased his own influence. Of course, he would still stealthily help Venian, however, he could not do too much, as doing so would go against the family's rules. It is difficult to understand. Then don't. There was no need to understand that. Kale continued to speak to Choi Han, who was looking at him. We just have to do what we have to do. What is it we have to do? Hong, who was next to Rayon, suddenly shouted out. Kidnap. Kale quickly added on before Choi Han, who seemed to think nothing of such vicious methods, nodded his head. We need to first prepare. Prepare. Yes. We need a location and someone's help. Who is the person? Someone you know as well. Choi Han started to think about the nobles who were at the capital when Kale had prevented the terror incident. He remembered Taylor Stan was there as well. Was Kale talking about Taylor Stan? At that moment, a completely unexpected name came out of Kale's mouth. Odious Flynn. Who? It was a foreign yet familiar name. Choi Han then recalled the moment he first met Locke, as well as the merchant who had hired him. The merchant. Yes. We need to see him. Odious Flynn, Billows's uncle, and someone who had given up on the successor position for the Flynn Merchant Guild. He was also the person secretly in control of the Northwest's underworld right now. To Choi Han and the others, he was just a good person who took care of Locke and the Blue Wolf tribe. Kale was going to go meet that good person first. That would let good things happen to them. We won't work with him for that long though. Choi Han shut up after seeing Kale's smile. Choi Han had learned that it was best to just quietly follow Kale when he had such a devious smile on his face. The simple carriage that looked like the type a slightly rich peasant would use slowly left the northeast region and entered the northwest region of the Roan Kingdom. Ding! Ding! The wind lightly tapped on the window. It was a surprisingly windy night. The man whose work would only start when night approached the Stan territory was leisurely leaning on his couch as usual. On his face was a gentle smile that he brought out every so often. I'm really curious. The man was very curious about what was going on. He tapped the armrest of the couch. Tap. 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 The window rustled along with the beat of his tapping. The wind was getting stronger. The moment he started to listen to the sound of the wind, he heard the sound of knocking. Knock knock knock. He quickly got up from the couch. Odious Flynn quickly opened the door with that bright smile on his face. Agu, young Master Nim, and Choi Han. I didn't expect to see the two of you. I was so shocked after getting Billows' message. Kale received the favorable greeting he had expected from Odious as he entered the room. No need to be shocked. Kale didn't even look around as he answered indifferently and went over to sit down on a couch. Odious watched that quietly before turning his gaze to the open door. Choi Han was standing there. I will wait outside. Choi Han, you're not coming in. No. Choi Han stood in front of the door like a guard. There was a corridor outside the door with a loud bar downstairs. This was the second floor of an inn in the Stan territory. This location, that was busy with people both night and day, was where Kale had told Billows to inform Odious to meet him. Come in if you get tired. I will, Odious Nim. Please have a nice conversation. Sure. Odious slowly closed the door. Kale was the only other person in the room. Odious naturally walked over and sat down across from Kale. Odious, who was sitting with the door to his back, comfortably started to converse with Kale. Young Master Nim, it is very nice to see you again. Really? Yes. I never expected you to come see me like this. I see. I couldn't believe it. Even Billows didn't know where I was, so how did you know I was in the Stan territory? Kale didn't respond to Odious's question right away, instead he sat up from the couch to lean forward. He then made eye contact with Odious, who was watching him closely, as if he was observing him. Kale didn't want to waste his time with such useless talk. Odious, let me commission you for something. Kale's phrasing made Odious start to smile. You really did know about it. Billows is serving a very scary person. Odious's gaze became sharp as he said that. How did Kale know? Did he have that many abilities? However, Odious did not put much meaning behind it. Kale had a thought as he watched Odious's expression change. He really is different than the others. Unlike everyone else whose secret identities were revealed by Kale, Odious was not surprised at all. He just considered it to be out of his expectations. The merchant of the underworld, who had experienced almost everything in his 60 years of life, asked Kale a question. What kind of commission are we talking about? I knew you would be easy to talk to. Kale looked very comfortable, as if he was sitting in his own bedroom. Odious couldn't believe Kale's relaxed demeanor, but quickly stopped a chuckle from coming out. Don't you want to get rid of Marquis Stan? Instead, the favorable smile was firmly planted on his face. I'm not sure what you mean. To be more specific, isn't Marquis Stan getting in your way of completely controlling the Northwest's underworld? Odious just quietly sat there and smiled. However, that smile was slowly disappearing. Kale was very calm, as if he was just talking about the weather or something trivial like that. I'm sure the citizens would be shocked to hear about how such arrogant person like Marquis Stan, who claims to value the proper etiquettes of nobility, is actually someone who commits a lot of atrocities in the underworld. Am I right? Young Master Nim. However, those years of experience do not go away that easily. Odious looked just as relaxed as Kale. What do you need me for? Kale easily responded back to the question. Your service. 1. Excuse me. This finally made Odious look anxious. Service? Was it what he was thinking about? It is as you heard. I need your service to cover up everything I do in the Stan territory, as well as supply anything I need. This includes a place for me to stay as well as food for me to eat. Odious started to smile as he casually asked. Are you trying to use my secret identity as a weakness in order to use me as a servant? However, Odious's tone was cold and sharp. Odious's gaze seemed to get past anxiety and turn into anger. Kale nonchalantly responded back. Do you even know what I want to do? What are you talking about? Do you know what I am trying to do? Knock knock knock. At that moment, Odious heard some knocks on the door. However, he could not turn around as Kale started to speak. By the way, there is a third party coming to this discussion today. It meant one more person was coming. Creak. The door slowly opened, even though nobody said anything. Odious got up from the couch and turned around. Creak. The door opened all the way and someone wearing a robe entered the room. That person removed their hood as soon as they entered. Gasp. Odious could not help but gasp. It was one of the people at the center of the information he considered top priority these days. Long time no see, Priestess Nim. It was the person who was always by the side of Taylor Stan, who was trying to take over the successor position. It was a woman who had short hair and was wearing a priestess outfit with no crest for the god she was serving. The priestess outfit was not visible under the robe today. It was the crazy priestess Cage. Ah, right. Kale modified his greeting. You are not a priestess anymore. Long time no see, Cage. Yes, young Master Nim. Nice to see you again. Kale turned to look at Odious, who was staring at him. Odious's eyes were full of avarice. The novel had a few lines about Marquis Stan and Venian during the Black Dragon arc. 2 of those lines were about how Venian got his power within the successor candidates. These 2 sentences made Kim Rock-soo understand how Venian could make Taylor Stan lose his legs and then eventually kill him. The current operation had started from those 2 lines. Although these 2 lines were short, they held a lot of information about the type of person Venian was, as well as his past. He asked Odious a question. So, aren't you curious about my commission now? Odious sat back down across from Kale without saying anything else. Cage sat down on the remaining seat. It was now the perfect time to discuss the operation. Chapter 84, We Meet Again. 3. The beginning of the conversation naturally started with the most curious person. Odious was the first to start the conversation. I never knew that the 2 of you knew each other. Are you curious about that? Odious answered as if it was obvious. Not at all. Kale also accepted it, as if that answer was the obvious answer. Someone like Odious would personally investigate something like this. What kind of merchant earns information from his client? Odious, when does Venian visit this place? While Odious had been working in the underworld for the past 5 years, he had figured out that there was someone who was an obstacle for his taking control of the entire underworld. However, he was never able to figure out who it was. The information that he had only recently learned was coming out of Kale's mouth. You mean the back alley? The young master in front of him knew that Venian would come to the back alley. Of course, Kale was just reiterating the information about Odious that he had read in the novel. They called the dark side of the Stan territory the back alley. Gambling, alcohol, prostitution, the black market with illegal items, slavery, and violence. All of those dirty things happen on a daily basis in the back alley. Only Odious did not use slaves or violence. He always put conditions so that both the client and he could be protected by each other for any deal. That was why Kale had come to find him. Furthermore, Taylor Stan, the eldest son of Marquis Stan's family, probably had the same train of thought. Well, it may be slightly different. Taylor knew that Venian was responsible for paralyzing his legs, however, he didn't know the source of Venian's resources. That was how stealthy Venian was with things. That was one of his strengths. However, Taylor was able to figure everything out thanks to Kale's communication to him. And he found that information to be very important. Taylor's desire was delivered through the excommunicated priestess, Cage. Young Master Taylor Nim wishes to know all sides of the Stan territory and the Northwest. Cage and Odious made eye contact. Taylor and Cage had asked Kale to connect them with Odious as soon as they heard the information from Kale. As a noble and a member of the family that rules over the region, young Master Taylor Stan Nim hates the underworld. I agree. I hate it as well. Kale was saying that he hated it out loud, but Odious nodded his head. Yes, a noble who values the citizens should feel that way. Doesn't the Hennetis territory not have an underworld? He was right. Although the Hennetis territory had some rebels and gangsters, there was no underworld or a black market. Although Count de Ruth seemed very average, he was devoted to the noble way of life. He had a sense of responsibility and had enough money that he would never allow something like that to happen. Furthermore, their location made it so that there wasn't much desire to develop such a market in the Hennetis territory. Then young Master Taylor Nim probably wants to get rid of the underworld. Yes. Odious started to smile at Cage's short response. He then turned to look toward Kale. Young Master Taylor Nim seems to be a true noble. The next sentence was the most important one. He doesn't want to lose his sense of justice. There were many reasons that the Stan family was destroyed in the novel. They bickered with Choi Han and ended up in a terrible situation. There was also the Black Dragon going berserk. Furthermore, Odious played a role in their downfall as well. He revealed Venion's identity in the underworld in order to prevent him from taking control of the underworld, and that destroyed the reputation of Marquis Stan and their entire family. The family that seemed to be the noblest had done something dishonorable and hurt the citizens. Of course, Odious had to reveal himself to bring this news to light. That put him in a lot of danger. Although Choi Han knew him because of the Blue Wolf tribe situation, he could not do anything to help. However, there would be no reason to do that this time. Kale put a clear ending to their conversation. The two of you can fight later. We need to get rid of our common enemy first. Odious and Cage both became confused at that. What reason did Kale Henitus have to hate Venion? Both of them had the same question. Excuse me, but what do you plan to do to Venion dash? Odious stopped mid-question and looked toward Kale. Kale had a simple answer for Odious. Killing him. That's. The crazy priestess. Cage cut Kale off with a shocked expression. However, Kale continued to speak. Isn't possible, but something worse than death. Excuse me. Cage had a blank expression as she thought about what Kale had just said. Something worse than killing him. She got the chills and looked back toward Kale. He still seemed to be relaxed. However, she knew about Kale, who had lent them money and stealthily got them into the capital while making them make a vow of death to protect the secret. He was someone who kept his word. Ha, ha ha dash. Odious started to laugh and nodded his head. Of course, there are many things that are worse than death. Cage made a noise and then started to speak. Then how do you plan to do that? She saw that Kale turned his head instead of responding. He was looking at Odious. That gaze let Odious know what he needed to do for Kale. I will be taking care of things for the young Master Nim, so you do not need to worry. Odious was happy and willing to serve Kale for this. He had no choice. Then I will take care of it with Odious's assistance. It was because Kale had said Odious would not need to personally do anything to Venion. Well, it isn't me but the dragon. In Kale's point of view, he would not be doing anything. All he had to do was set it up. It was Rayon who was going to take care of everything. Agu, it looks like I'll be busy for the first time in a while. The 60-year-old Odious pretended to be weak. However, he had a bright expression on his face. He looked like he was ready for a celebration. Then move quickly. I will be staying in this inn. Oh, sure. Odious, who was between the middle age and senior age, easily got off the couch and headed for the door. He then heard Kale's voice behind him. Odious, find a house. A house. Odious turned around to look at Kale. Yes. And you're going to have to do a good job serving me. I only like luxurious stuff. Odious was fine accepting Kale's attitude of actually asking him to serve him. I've never had a request like this in my 60 years of life, but I will consider it my honor. You're also getting paid enough for it. I am getting rid of your obstacle for you. That is plenty. Odious opened the door. Choi Han gently smiled at him. Odious now understood why Choi Han had been guarding the door. A discussion like this needed someone on watch. See you next time, Choi Han. Of course, Merchant Nim. Choi Han closed the door again after Odious left. Now it was just Kale and Cage in the room. Kale had a question for her as soon as it was just the two of them. Cage. Yes, young Master Nim. Why can't I kill Venion? Cage quickly answered as if she had expected the question. Taylor will make a proclamation to his siblings in 2 days. Kale had a feeling like he already knew what it would be. That he won't kill any of them. I knew you would know. She held back her admiration for Kale as she continued to speak. Although it seems to go against the Stan family's way of life, it is not completely going against it, as the successor only needs to make the other siblings unable to try to take the position away. Other people may ask how you can make sure nobody else is tempted to take the successor down except by killing them. That was why she was planning on explaining it to Kale. However, Kale already knew the answer. You can use a vow of death. Correct. I guess I don't need to explain anything to you, young Master Kale. I guess the god of death really hasn't pushed you aside, Miss Cage. Although the temple of the god of death had excommunicated her, the god of death did not do so. Cage started to smile and responded to Kale. Well, I would be really happy if he would stop bothering me. The conversation became lighter once Odious had left and Cage had no problem saying whatever she wanted. The other priestesses might faint in shock if they had heard her words. We can't always get what we want, right? However, Kale had no reaction to it. Then let us chat again next time. I am tired today. Kale announced the end of the discussion. He verified that Cage had left the inn before speaking to Choi Han and the invisible Rayon. Let's sit back and wait. However, there was no need to wait for a long time. Kale stood on top of the roof and looked around. The weather is perfect. It was a foggy and hot day, making it very humid. The time is perfect as well. It was early morning before the sun even came up. Hong was next to Kale nodding off as he was still half asleep. But he was trying his best to stay awake. There is also not many people around. Since it was foggy, humid, and early, it was the perfect conditions to hinder people from being out. Especially because this was the back alley where people stayed up all night with their vices and were only just getting to bed. Kale looked down to the ground again. I heard there were a lot of routes. The chance he uses this route today is over 70%. Kale recalled Odious's report and looked to the side. Rayon was calmly sitting there looking down. Kale petted Rayon's head. Human, do not do that. Contrary to his words, Rayon sat there and allowed Kale to pet him. However, he was glaring at Kale. Weak human, you will not do anything today. Fine, fine. I will just watch. Be careful as you watch. Okay. Rayon seemed to be satisfied with Kale's answer as he opened up his arms. The black wings started to move as Rayon floated up in the air. Rayon's movement made Choi Han, On, and Hong all start to move. On, I leave it to you. This is the best environment for me. On wagged her tail as she disappeared into the fog. Hong looked toward Kale. Time for poison. Yes. Hong nodded his head at Kale's response and approached Rayon, who floated downward. Hong patted Rayon's body before smiling and disappearing into the fog. I'll be on my way as well. Choi Han quietly moved to the other roof as well. Rayon approached Kale and waited in the air. Rayon. What is it? Do whatever you want. Rayon started to smile as he answered. Don't say something so obvious. Rayon disappeared into the fog. Kale leisurely crossed his arm as he looked down to the ground. The 70% chance was correct. 3 people hiding themselves under their robes entered the alleyway. Vinian should be one of those 3 people. Kale leaned on the railing and looked down at the trio. Vinian Stan did not know Kale was watching as he started to walk quickly. Crazy bastard. Vinian was swearing internally, which was not how a noble should act. Yesterday, his formerly paralyzed brother said some crazy shit. I will not kill my siblings. I only plan on ruling over them. Taylor's words caused a huge reaction, making the family quite chaotic right now. Thanks to that, Vinian was able to come to this place early in the morning. Taylor was gaining too much power right now. There was a need to suppress him. Normally, he would not have made the trip himself, however, according to his lackey in the back alley, the most influencing black market merchant kept getting in their way lately, making it difficult for them to make any moves. All these useless fools keep getting in my way. Vinian clicked his tongue as he quickly walked through the fog. He was thankful that it was foggy as it would prevent many people from seeing him. At least the weather is helping me. Vinian was happy that the fog was getting thicker. His 2 lackeys followed behind him. There was something they missed as they walked through the fog. It was because their hood was down very far to prevent people from recognizing them. The fog above their heads was slowly becoming black. Meow. Tisk. Vinian clicked his tongue at these cats that meowed even this early in the morning. There were a lot of useless people and stray animals in this back alley. They needed to either gather them up and teach them or kill them all. Meow. Another chilling meow could be heard. That made Vinian think of someone. That existence was responsible for all of his issues. I should have killed it. Vinian started to frown. He should have killed that damn black dragon. None of this would have happened had he done that. He had caused a scene about taming it, and that led to his downfall. He was extremely frustrated. At that moment, he heard a cat meow once again. Meow. So annoying. It was the moment Vinian mumbled in frustration. Ugh. The sound of someone trying to breathe was heard behind Vinian. Plop. He then heard something fall to the ground. Why, young master, and I dash. He then heard his lackey's voice. Vinian quickly turned around. What? One of his lackeys was on the ground holding his neck. The lackey that had called out to Vinian was staggering as he slowly fell. See, can't breathe, Keck. The lackey's face turned blue before he fell down. That lackey's had touched the tip of Vinian's boot. This sudden turn of events made Vinian start to frown and become chaotic. He had never expected something like this. Meow. At that moment, he heard the cat meow again. Vinian realized something else as well. The cat's meow was slowly getting closer. Meow. Above. It is coming from above. Vinian lifted his head. That was when he saw it. Huh. Unlike the white fog around them, the fog above them was dyed black and red. That fog looked dangerous. Vinian subconsciously took a step back. It was at that moment. Tap. Something touched Vinian's back. Vinian stopped for a moment before grabbing the hilt of his sword and quickly turning around. However, all he could see was the fog. What the? He subconsciously started to speak. His lackeys were moaning behind him. Oh dash. Keck, ugh hi. He could hear a faint wind as well. Swyish. It was the moment Vinian was about to turn his head on reflex. Hi there. Vinian could hear a voice. He turned back around but did not see anything. No. It was just that he could not see it. A black figure slowly appeared in front of Vinian. That figure was taking his time to slowly reveal himself. Ah, a dash dot. Vinian started to step backward. Tap. However, his path was blocked by one of his fallen lackeys. And then, that black existence completely revealed himself. Those eyes that showed intense hatred for Vinian. He had not seen this figure for a very long time. We meet again. The black dragon appeared in front of him. The dragon, Rayon, was smiling. Chapter 85, We Meet Again. 4. How did this bastard? Rough words that were not fitting for a noble came spilling out of Vinian's mouth on reflex. His hood slowly came off to reveal his entire face. It was completely pale. The black dragon slowly flapped his wings as he approached Vinian. Why are you so surprised? The calm and low voice reached Vinian's ear. What is it? Are you having a hard time recognizing me because I am not all bloodied up? Rayon had a completely indifferent expression as he said that. He then slowly approached Vinian while his black mana was fluctuating in the air around him. Vinian took a step back. Ugh. He stepped on one of his lackey's bodies as he continued to walk backward. Vinian Stan. The dragon was speaking. Vinian had never heard the dragon speak in the 4 years he had watched it get tortured. It was also calling out his name. The dragon in front of him was different from the existence that used to get beaten and bloodied by clubs and whips. Although the dragon was still the same tiny size, that formerly tortured existence was standing in front of him as a higher-ranking race. I guess you never expected me to come back. Vinian had never expected this. All he had thought about was how he needed to find the dragon and bring it back to teach it to learn. It was a foolish thought. The foot taking another step back had started to shake. He couldn't help it. What? What the hell is going on? The dark red fog approached him and started to move up, starting from his feet and moving up to his leg. It was like a snake was coiling around him. However, he could not run away. Nice to see you again. That dragon that was greeting him had tied him up with his mana. This snake-like fog had now reached Vinian's neck. Ugh. One of his lackeys grunted once more before becoming quiet. Hiss. The wind sounded like a snake hissing by his ear. Vinian looked very shabby right now compared to his usual self. No. The fog reached just underneath his nose now. He had never been through something like this before. He could not do anything with his body paralyzed by the dragon's magic. The dark red fog slowly covered his nose and face. Vinian tried to hold his breath, but eventually, the fog entered into his nose. He could not breathe. At that moment, he could see the dragon's face through the fog. "I am very happy to see you, Vinian Stan." "Ugh." Rayon could see Vinian's face through the fog. Vinian's body was shaking after having absorbed On and Hong's lightly poisonous fog. Rayon slowly removed the mana, tying Vinian down. Plop. Vinian fell down to the ground. He had already lost his consciousness prior to Rayon removing his mana. Rayon just quietly stared at the fallen Vinian. At that moment, a hand started to pet him on the head. It was Kale. Kale had used the sound of the wind to lightly jump from the rooftop. He petted Rayon's head as he looked down at Vinian. He could hear Rayon's voice. "Weak. He's so terribly weak." Kale put on a bitter smile. It was because Rayon sounded so upset. However, Kale asked him back. "So, do you want to stop?" "No, I will treat him the same way he treated me." Kale patted that round head of Rayon's after seeing him respond without a second of hesitation. He looked around before speaking once again. "Start." Tap, tap. The kittens, On and Hong, who were on top of a nearby building, lightly jumped down. Once they did that, On controlled the fog in order to provide a path for Choi Han. They are all waiting at the entrance of the alley. Kale could see Rayon slowly turning invisible and gave the order. "Tell them to come." "Yes, sir." 2 small carriages soon entered the alley and filled it up. A person came out of one of those carriages. Good morning, young Master Nim." "Here they are." The crazy priestess Cage gulped while looking at the unconscious lackeys on the ground, as well as Vinian Stan, who Choi Han had picked up. She had not seen what had happened in this alley. The fog had played a part, but it was mainly because Choi Han was in the front of the alley entrance guarding it. She could see that the 2 lackeys were frowning even while unconscious and that Vinian looked very pale with fear. "We do not have time." "Ah, yes." She came back to her senses at Kale's serious tone and quickly ordered the 2 people who came with her to move Vinian's lackeys. While they did that, she approached Kale, who was about to leave with Vinian in the other carriage. "Remember, 4 days later." "Yes, that is plenty of time." Kale, who was confidently saying 4 days was enough, as well as Choi Han, who was throwing Vinian into a corner, both seemed calm. That gave Cage the chills. He felt different than the Kale Henitus who stepped up to protect everyone in the castle, as well as the same young master who helped her and Taylor out. However, Kale soon started to smile. He needed to act properly for his plan. "Yes, I will trust you. Since you set the date, please remember it, young Master Nim." 4 days. Kale thought about what would happen in these next 4 days as he gave a clear response to this priestess who was full of worries. "Yes. It is impossible for me to forget, so please stop worrying." "Absolutely." Kale looked toward Vinian as he continued to speak. "Each day will feel like a year, so he will definitely not be able to forget it." He then turned toward Cage and said goodbye. "Then we will be off now." "Ah, yes." She would never forget the way Kale stared at Vinian. It was so scary. She continued to watch the carriage until it disappeared out of the alley. It should be fine, since he promised not to kill him. Kale promised to hand Vinian over without killing him. Cage and Taylor trusted him since he wasn't the type to break a promise and because he was the reason that they were able to hatch such a plan in the first place. "We should trust him since we said we would." Cage firmed her resolve. She needed to start moving quickly starting today. "Everybody is on the carriage?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's go." Her carriage left the alley as well. It was heading in the opposite direction of Kale's carriage. Kale's carriage was heading opposite of the Stan Territories Lord's castle. It was heading toward the quite luxurious section where the rich, the nobles, and the knights lived. The streets were clean and all of the buildings looked fancy. Click. Click. The carriage that was moving across the early morning fog stopped in front of a single residence. The gate slowly opened. Creak, clunk. The carriage headed to the back of the residence as soon as the strong iron gates opened. There was a door heading underground in this average-looking residence. It's a nice house. Cale made an observation as he got off the carriage and looked toward the driver. The driver had his head deep under a hood. The robes had lifted up a bit in response to Cale. "You can go." Odious, the man under the hood, slightly bowed before quietly and stealthily heading out of the residence's back gate. He wanted to turn around and look at Cale once more, but held himself back. I was wrong about him. He had personally moved because Cale had told him it was something he couldn't leave to one of his subordinates. He now understood why Cale had told him to serve him. The things they were doing were not things anybody else could know about. A torture chamber. He was certain Cale was known for being a good person. He was also one who would sacrifice himself for others. However, that was not the real Cale. Even Choi Han, who was a good person, listened to Cale's orders. Odious thought about his nephew, Billows, who had said he would follow Cale. Odious then started to move quickly as he needed to cover Cale's tracks for the next 4 days. The problem is that I am following him like it is normal. Odious mumbled in a quiet voice before disappearing into the fog. Cale opened the door heading underground once Odious disappeared. Screech. A chilling noise was heard as the door slowly opened. "Ah, you've arrived." He could see Beacrox right by the door. Beacrox had arrived here yesterday evening. Son of the assassin, Ron, a swordsman, and chef. Beacrox held many titles. However, the one title being utilized right now was that of a torture specialist. Yes. Let's move him. Choi Han lifted Vinian up and headed down. Beacrox followed behind him while peeking at the black dragon flying next to Cale. Cale pretended not to see Beacrox peeking at Rayon. Cale had revealed Rayon's existence to him yesterday. He easily accepted it. I knew it. Beacrox accepted it as soon as Cale told him Rayon was the one who brought them food when they were traveling to the capital. However, Beacrox had some issues with what they were doing, as Cale had not explained anything about Vinian. But at least he follows orders well. Beacrox was very thorough with following through. Cale felt that way about Beacrox even more as soon as he headed to the chamber underground. The room was quite large. You set it up properly. There were many types of equipment on one side of the room. Beacrox had prepared all of it. Cale gasped while looking at those vicious tools before turning to look at Rayon. It is the same. Rayon calmly raided the room. This underground torture chamber was set up to look as close to the cave that Rayon had to suffer in for the first 4 years of his life. Choi Han put Vinian on a chair. Beacrox looked toward Cale and started to speak. Do I just need to work on him? Yes. What should I do to him? Rayon was the one to answer that question. Beacrox had to speak to the dragon that flew in front of him. I will return everything I suffered. Suffered? Beacrox did not know about Rayon's story. Yes, I was abused for 4 years, dealing with being tortured and beaten day after day. I was also imprisoned in a cave. I want payback for my 4 years of suffering during these next 4 days. The calm 4-year-old's voice echoed in the room. Choi Han rubbed his face while On and Hong didn't know what to do. Cale crossed his arms and looked toward Rayon. Rayon really was great and mighty. In Cale's opinion, it was difficult to calmly talk about your pains like Rayon was doing. I will give you a basic rundown of how I suffered. First of all, I was whipped until this mighty dragon skin of mine was raw. Rayon briefly explained in detail everything that he had suffered through during the 4 years. Rayon was very passionate as he explained it all to Beacrox, who was carefully listening. He wanted to pay Vinian back for everything. And to keep hitting the spot that is already bloodied and injured is the most important basic knowledge. Bang. Rayon stopped talking and looked toward the source of the noise. Cale had kicked the chair the unconscious Vinian was sitting on. Vinian fell to the ground, but still remained unconscious. This made Cale wonder how strong of a sedative Hong had used to poison Vinian. Cale fixed his shirt as if nothing happened before starting to speak. Keep doing what you have to do. I understand, human. Rayon returned to talking about his past. He just described the core of it, as he did not have much time. Silence filled the room once he finished. Kale looked toward Beacrox and then started to smile. Beacrox had taken a pair of white gloves out of his pocket. He always put these gloves on so that he does not get dirted. Sounds like there will be a lot of blood. He then took out another pair of white gloves and put it on over the first pair. Kale had never seen or read about Beacrox putting on 2 pairs of gloves. Beacrox. Yes, sir. Beacrox looked toward Kale at his calling. Make some food before we start. Food. Beacrox looked toward Kale as if Kale was crazy. However, Kale pointed to Rayon. Rayon stretched his wings as if he agreed with Kale. Rayon needs something to eat. That bastard hit me while eating, saying that seeing my blood made it easier to swallow the food. That crazy son of a... Choi Han started to swear. Beacrox took out another pair of gloves before speaking to Rayon and Kale. Looks like I need to prepare a feast. This made Kale think that Beacrox really was weak against affection. He was a torture specialist, but whether it is with the wolf children or Rayon, Beacrox seemed to be very weak against children and affection. Beacrox asked a question as he headed up to prepare the food. Shall I cripple him? No need to do that. Rayon responded. All right. Young Master Nim, will you be down here as well? Kale let out a moan and started to frown at Beacrox's question. I don't really want to see it, but... He wanted to live in peace because he hated seeing blood or wars. However, this was a special occasion. They had set up an invisibility magic device in the corner. It would be complicated if Kale's identity was revealed, so he could only watch in secret. I don't think I can enjoy a feast while watching a torture. I should just stick with wine. Kale knew it would be brutal. He's probably going to want to throw up and get angry at Vinian. In a situation like this, alcohol was better. Kale tried to open his mouth to ask for wine, however, Rayon started to speak first. I understand, weak human. No need to think about it. You do not need to watch. It's true. I feel like it may be difficult for you, young Master Nim. Choi Han continued to speak after Rayon, and even An and Hong nodded their heads. Kale started to speak with a shocked expression on his face. What are you talking about? Kale petted Rayon's head before walking past him. If I don't watch, are you going to watch alone? There were some things you needed to see no matter how hard it was to watch. He then took a potion out of his magic bag and handed it to Beacrox. Use the potion if it looks like he is going to die. Then he will be able to last all 4 days. Of course. Beacrox easily accepted it as if it was natural. In fact, it was Choi Han and the Black Dragon's responses that Beacrox did not understand. Then let me go get it ready. Beacrox prepared the best feast possible underground. It was a feast just for Rayon. Boo. Vinian groaned and tried to move. His body felt heavy. Although he could feel every part of his body, it felt like he was lacking oxygen. He soon came to his senses and tried to figure out what had happened. Gasp. Vinian opened his eyes in shock. What he saw in front of his eyes was a feast. A grand feast that even nobles would not usually see was in front of his eyes on a just as luxurious table. The Black Dragon looked down toward Vinian from the table. Clang. Vinian turned his head as he heard the clang from the chains on his limbs and neck. Dash. He wanted to speak but could not say anything. The magic chains on his neck prevented him from speaking. He could not say anything, just like how Rayon had suffered. PSSSH, bang. The whip was moving across the floor. It was a large whip with metal and glass embedded throughout the whip. It was very similar to the whip that was used on Rayon. The masked man wielding that whip slowly approached Vinian. Start. Rayon gave the order. Chapter 86, We Meet Again. 5. The masked man, Beacrox, flicked the whip. Flick. The whip cut through the air and landed on Vinian. Vinian's body was heavy, but he could still feel pain. The whip continued to land on Vinian's body. The simple noble's attire underneath the robe started to tear and the skin underneath started to bleed as the sharp additions to the whip cut into his skin. Some of the glass fell off the whip and remained pierced in his skin. It was the same way Rayon was abused when he was just a newborn. Ooh, ugh, oh dash. Vinian was shouting something but the words did not come out of his mouth. He tried to struggle and move but his body was still paralyzed. Just like Rayon had suffered under the mana restriction chains, Vinian could not do anything but suffer. All he could do was slowly curl up. However, just as Rayon had done, Vinian glared up at the black dragon on top of the table. It was a glare that showed that he would not give in. Flick. Flick. The whip cut through his cheeks as he continued to glare. Ugh. Vinian's body shook in pain as it slowly became drenched in blood. However, Beacrox showed no reaction and continued to whip at a steady pace. He whipped the bleeding areas over and over and did not show any emotion even as the blood sprayed into the air. Kale turned after hearing a moan from his side. The baby kittens On and Hong were in the invisible area with him curled up next to each other. Hong seemed to find it difficult to watch as he looked up at Vinian and looked down at the ground over and over. Rayon had already set up noise-suppressing magic in this invisible area so there was no chance of getting caught by Vinian. However, it wouldn't really matter if Vinian heard the noise. Ugh, Vinian's cheeks were completely bloody as he started to shout some groans and words that could not be understood. Every time he did that, Beacrox just flicked the whip even harder. Do not speak. Stay still. Stop glaring. That seemed to be the message as the whip landed any time Vinian showed any of those reactions. I need to watch, that's what I need to do. That was what the silver kitten On was saying as she lowered her head. Kale understood how they were feeling. On and Hong were in pain watching this. The basement, where Vinian's arms, legs, and neck were chained up, was slowly turning red with blood. But it was not that they were struggling to watch because it was scary or because they felt bad for Vinian. It was because they knew what Rayon had gone through and that this was only just the beginning. Kale petted On and Hong's heads. You don't need to watch if you can't. He turned his head as he said that. He could see Rayon sitting alone on top of the table. Rayon was currently eating. He was eating his favorite food, steak. Rayon continued to stuff his mouth with food. Rayon fed himself over and over while listening to Vinian scream. Rayon had looked forward to this moment over and over for a very long time. He had imagined this exact scene in his head numerous times. That was why he could not miss even a moment of this meal, no, this feast. Precious food that he could not have even imagined half a year ago, as well as a healthy body and his freedom. Rayon continued to eat as he savored all of the things he had now gained. Cough. Rayon coughed for a moment from stuffing too much food but he did not stop. Kale observed Rayon's face as well as his actions. Rayon was crying. However, he did not stop. Cough. He continued to stuff himself with food while observing Vinian getting whipped. On and Hong did not manage to see how Rayon was right now. But Kale was making sure to observe Rayon. Ooh, yuck, Vinian's body started to twitch. Beacrox continued to flick the whip in spots he knew would hurt. Vinian could not even look up at the black dragon on top of the table anymore. He just had a blank expression as he slowly lost consciousness while being surrounded by his own blood. Sweesh. With a loud noise, the whip struck Vinian's head, making him finally lose consciousness. Rayon stuffed another steak into his mouth. Rayon's eyes were open, but he did not see Vinian. What he saw was his past self. That was why he could not stop. It was at that moment. You're going to choke. Tap. Tap. He could feel the sturdy yet warm hand on his back. He was familiar with it now. Rayon turned his head. Tisk, it's all over your mouth. The voice was as indifferent as usual. Rayon could see a sleeve wiping his mouth as well as Kale's face. Rayon slowly turned his head. Vinian was lying on the ground. Rayon looked at the unconscious Vinian and started to speak. I will continue to watch. Sure. Let's watch together. Rayon put his head on the table as Kale said that. Kale continued to pat Rayon's back as he looked at Beacrox. Beacrox could see that Kale was frowning. What is it, young master? Why are you using the potion now? Kale pointed to the potion in Beacrox's hand with his chin. Beacrox asked a question back with confusion. Don't we need to heal him? Use it when he looks like he's about to croak. Although Vinian had fainted, he was still groaning. His entire body was covered in blood and made it look like his skin was red. Beacrox looked toward Vinian after hearing what Kale had to say and nodded his head. He won't die just yet. Your order is correct and amazing. He put the potion back down. Kale let out a sigh, then went to lift Rayon up in his arms. He then started to frown. Rayon was heavy. Rayon was very heavy. Although Rayon had not grown in size these past few months, his weight seemed to have exponentially increased. Kale could feel his arms slightly shaking but kept on holding Rayon. He couldn't just leave him here. Kale could feel his shoulders starting to get sweaty as he looked at An and Hong. They were anxiously walking circles around Kale and Rayon. Kale sensed his arms quickly going numb and quickly started to speak. Let's rest a bit. Nobody said anything in opposition. However, Beacrox had a question. What should I do when he wakes up? Isn't it obvious? Rayon answered after that. We will continue. What he said. I understand. Kale pushed the door and it opened with a small noise. Choi Han was standing there with an expression that showed both anger and sorrow. Kale gave an order to Choi Han, who looked back and forth between Rayon and himself. There's an unopened bottle of wine in there. Bring that along with a glass. Kale decided that he needed to drink tonight. Kale headed for the residence upstairs as he asked Rayon. Did you grow bigger? You're heavier than last time. Weak human, you just have no arm strength. I can't say anything about that. Rayon, who had been stuffing himself since the early morning, raised his head. He could see the view outside the residence. The fog had lifted, and morning was quickly approaching. Well, it's good that you are growing. Good job getting bigger. Rayon put his face on Kale's shoulder after hearing that. Kale's arm was shaking, but Rayon pretended not to know. And Kale let Rayon do that. He was only 4 years old. It was fine for him to act this way. It was now late at night 3 days later. Rayon flew up from the table and landed in front of Vinian. Huff, huff. Vinian was breathing heavily. His face had become a mess in the last few days, and that arrogant noble was now crying and begging for his life. He had glared at first, thinking that someone would come to save him, but he grew tired and weary as he did not know how much time had passed. All he knew that Rayon continued to eat meals while watching him suffer. Vinian Stan. Rayon quietly looked down at Vinian, who had his face on the ground and did not dare to look up. Rayon remembered the others who had abused him as well. Kale already had a plan to punish those people as well. This included the Marquis. Although the Marquis had not personally abused him, he was the one responsible for all of this in the first place. Even he will pay for it soon enough. I plan to let you live. That was why Rayon was planning on letting Vinian live. Rayon felt like even the term human was wasted on Vinian after seeing this weak, stupid, and hateful human who was shaking without being able to even look at him. Rayon remembered what Vinian had said to him in the past. It really is best to see this dragon bastard's blood when I'm annoyed. Always gets me in the mood. A calm voice reached Vinian's ear. And I will come find you whenever I don't have an appetite. Rayon was planning to do the same thing Vinian had done. Vinian's body started to shake after hearing what Rayon had to say. The dark red fog surrounded Vinian's body again. Vinian continued to shake in fear. He looked at the dark red fog surrounding him and tried not to lose consciousness. Looks like he is unconscious. In the end, he fell unconscious. Beacrox verified that Vinian was knocked out before looking at Kale. Kale was slightly astonished while looking at Beacrox. For 3 days, Beacrox had instilled fear in that snotty Vinian's mind. It was only natural that Vinian's entire body was injured, but Beacrox had given Vinian enough fear every so often to make him lose his will. There's no need for Cage's mental torture. They didn't need to call Cage. Of course, there were many times that it was difficult for even Kale to watch Beacrox torturing Vinian because of how brutal it was. However, he had to watch as he promised to watch. Choi Han approached them and stood next to Kale while looking down at Vinian. He seemed to have been hoping for the Marquis to come save him. Too bad. The only thing that kept Vinian going was the fact that he had hoped that the Marquis would come save him. Even if he wasn't the legitimate successor, one of his potential successors had disappeared. They would need to find him even if it was to just save face. Do you mean that? No. Choi Han shook his head at Kale's question. I feel like we need to torture him more, but this is Rayon's business, so I am holding back. Good. Although the fact that Rayon told him he will not kill him probably put some hope in his heart. Choi Han looked down at Vinian with an odd expression. As Vinian thought, the Marquis was currently frantically looking for Vinian. Two of Vinian's lackeys were caught by Taylor's friend Cage, and they had revealed that Vinian had worked with the Stan Territory's underworld to do all sorts of illegal deeds. That revelation put the citizens in a state of shock. Although the Marquis and his family was tyrannical, they had thought that they were at least upright nobles. The Marquis was currently looking for Vinian Stan, who had left his injured lackeys behind and ran away when Cage and her crew caught them. Of course, the person with the evidence for all of this was the eldest son, Taylor Stan. Kale gave an order to Beacrox and Choi Han. Get it ready. Beacrox put on a new pair of white gloves. A potion was in his hand. Vinian Stan will end up getting caught in his secret base in the back alley without an injury on his body. It was time for him to feel despair while remaining alive. Chapter 87, We Meet Again. 6. Watching that despair would be Rayon's joy. Looks fancy. Kale said that as he gave Choi Han a command. Sit him on that chair over there. Got it. Choi Han threw the unconscious Vinian onto the luxurious leather seat. Kale was looking toward Choi Han, who was avoiding his gaze. I'm sorry. I got even angrier after looking around this base. Base. Kale's group was currently in Vinian's secret base in the back alley. It was full of luxurious and fancy items. The crazy priestess Cage had told him about this location 2 days ago. Cage, who served the god of death, was still a priestess even though she was excommunicated. She specialized in curses and mental torture. It was easy for her to get the information from Vinian's lackeys. Of course, since her abilities were used under the name of a god, she could only use her curses in situations where she believed she was just. But she should have had enough reasons for justice to use her curses this time. Still, she's amazing too. There was nobody else serving the god of death who was better than her at using curses. It made sense why people called her the spawn of a necromancer and that she was not fit to be a priestess. Well, I know there is a separate necromancer. As was the case with many fantasy worlds, you were bound to find those professions that were said to have become lost in the past if you looked hard enough. Something like finding out that the main character's neighboring oldman was a sword master in the past was not uncommon in fantasy worlds. It was all just part of making a story interesting to the readers. This world is the same. The Birth of a Hero was known for having many of those types of developments. Kale quietly observed the unconscious Vinian, who was hunched over on the chair. I understand why you would want to throw him like that, but this position is not what we need. Beacrox. Sigh, yes sir. Beacrox let out a deep sigh before approaching Vinian. He then sat Vinian down properly and made sure Vinian looked tidy, fixing his outfit, hair, etc. Anybody who saw Vinian now would think that he was a fancy noble who has had no problems or injuries for the last few days. Vinian's back still had a few small scars that could not be healed with the potion, but the majority of the injuries throughout his body were healed. In fact, his face, hands, and visible areas showed no signs of injuries at all. Then we will be on our way now. Sure. Beacrox took Choi Han with him as they stealthily left through the base's back door. Kale approached Rayon, who had been quietly curled up in a corner since earlier. Shall we start? Sure, human. You guys come here as well. Mio. An and Hong jumped up and sat down next to Rayon and Kale. Kale made sure they were all against the corner and looked toward Rayon. Black mana started to appear from Rayon's paw. It was now time to watch. Pot. With a quiet noise, Kale's body started to turn invisible. They were no longer visible inside the base. Ooh, oh. A bit later, the base was filled with a person's moans. It was Vinian. He was frowning, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare. Gasp. He gasped as he opened his eyes. He could only observe his surroundings with a blank expression at that point. He blinked a few times and tried to figure out where he was. This is dash dot. Vinian touched his neck in shock. He could speak. Human language was actually coming out of his mouth. He also realized that there were no shackles on his neck. He then frantically checked his body to see that there were no injuries or blood on his arms and legs. His fancy outfit did not have any blood on it at all. He was not in any sort of pain. Was it a dream? He couldn't tell whether this was the dream or if that basement and the torture was the dream. It was so terrible and painful that he still clearly remembered it, but it must have been a dream. Vinian slowly reached his hand out and touched the desk in front of him. This definitely felt like it was real. Yes, this was all real. Vinian started to frown and wonder if he had been dreaming. Rather than being abducted on his way to the base, he had arrived and then fallen asleep. Ha! Vinian started to smile, however, many emotions were running through his mind. Yes, it was only just a dream. It had to be a dream. He could still feel the whip cutting through his body, as well as the torturer's cold gaze and that dragon bastard's gaze, but it was all just a dream. It didn't matter that he was still afraid. It wasn't real. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how he was here right now. Ha! Vinian put his hands on his neck. He could feel the warmth of his hands. It was at that moment. Mio. Vinian flinched and his shoulders started to shake. Kale, who had been watching in the side in his invisible state, petted Hong's head once with an indifferent expression on his face. Hong let out one more chilling meow. Mio. Vinian's face turned pale and his hands started to shake. Something suddenly popped into his head. I plan to let you live. And I will come to find you whenever I don't have an appetite. Vinian's hands that were clutching onto the desk were turning pale. See, crazy dash. He looked down and started to shake. The dark red fog was slowly crawling up his legs like a snake. His face turned teary like a little baby. That crazy dragon bastard. He quickly started to brush away the fog. However, the fog did not disappear and just moved further up his body. He felt like he was going to go crazy. However, at that moment, Vinian realized something. It was different than last time. Unlike last time, he was able to move his body. Vinian looked around and quickly found the door. The moment Vinian laid his eyes on the door, Kale looked up at the clock. If Vinian hurries a bit, it would create the picture-perfect moment. Kale patted On's back this time. Sweeyish. The fog started to move up Vinian's leg even faster. Meow. The two kittens' meows became even louder. Vinian's two legs were shaking. He quickly got up from the chair. Bang. The leather chair fell backward with a loud noise. However, Vinian did not care, as he quickly rushed toward the door. Unlike his fancy clothes and slick hair that were fit for a noble, his face looked like he had gone crazy from fear. Quickly dash. Vinian grabbed the doorknob with his shaking hand. It was at that moment. Click. He heard someone turning the doorknob from the outside. Was it his lackeys? Vinian thought that he no longer needed to face the scary situation on his own. He was relieved. It definitely had to be his two lackeys from the morning. Someone pulled the door open from the outside. Thanks to that, Vinian did not need to do anything, as the door had opened for him. Creak. The door slowly opened. Vinian did not manage to notice that the fog surrounding his legs had disappeared. He was too absorbed by the light he could see coming from the other side of the door. The door finally opened completely. We finally found you. The person to greet Vinian was Taylor Stan, his older brother whom he had paralyzed in the past. A dash. Vinian took a step back. Behind Taylor was the path heading down to the secret base, which was now filled with a lot of people. It was filled with both Taylor's people and people from the Stan estate. What is this? Taylor confirmed that Vinian had no visible injuries before looking at his face. Vinian's face was full of fear. Taylor looked past Vinian's shoulder into the base. Nobody was there. However, he knew that Kale was inside. He had borrowed Kale's invisibility magic device before. That was why he was even more certain that Kale was inside. Is this a dream too? Vinian blankly started to mumble to himself. Taylor looked at his brother, the brother that he detested, and answered his question. Looks like you had a long nightmare. He turned around and gave an order to the knights of the Stan estate. Arrest him. This was only the start of Vinian's nightmares. Not only was he now completely pushed out of the successor picture, but he would also have to pay the price for all of his illegal deeds. He had to receive the anger of all the Stan family members for ruining their reputation. The dragon did this. The dragon did all dash. Taylor did not care about Vinian's mumblings. He focused on what Cage was saying as she walked next to him. Tonight. Taylor could meet his benefactor again tonight. It had been quite a while. Young Master Nim, should I start searching the base right now? Taylor shook his head at the knight's question. The most important thing right now is to quietly move Vinian to the castle. There are too many people outside. Won't it be difficult to do it quietly? The citizens of the Stan territory were gathered outside. That was why the knights were anxious. However, this was all because Odious had spread the word at Kale's order. Taylor knew about it as well, but pretended to worry about it. Even he could do this level of acting now. That is true, but we still need to move him as quietly as possible. We cannot allow our reputation to fall even further. I understand. The knight responded with a serious expression. You can focus on searching the base after that. We will leave some of the soldiers here to guard the entrance. Yes, sir. Taylor made it a bit easier for Kale to get out and turned his back to the entrance. He now had to go to the castle and cut off the Marquis and Vinian's arms and legs, one by one. Some of the knights remained to protect this empty secret base. The others went to capture Vinian's other lackeys, who were probably in his other bases. Hey, guard properly. It's not like anybody is there. We haven't been able to rest the last few days. Let's just chill. We cannot do that. Why so serious? We just have to prevent someone from going in. The two knights were talking quietly so that the soldiers could not hear. A light wind passed by behind them, but they paid no attention to it. Although the wind didn't make sense, they couldn't see anything anyway, so they didn't care. Kale, the person responsible for that light wind, got on a carriage he had prepared not too far from the base. Rayon, who was following behind Kale, removed the invisibility on everyone except himself. Shall we head out now? Go. Odious closed the carriage door and sat down in the driver's spot. The carriage slowly started to head toward the residence. Kale leaned on the chair and could feel the soft leather relaxing him. He looked down and made eye contact with Rayon, who was no longer invisible and was laying on his lap. At that moment, Rayon started to smile and speak. I am not too bad. I am a great and mighty dragon. Yes. Their hell is only just beginning. Right. Kale spoke to the others in the carriage. Let's all eat some delicious food and get some rest today. However, Kale had to enjoy his dinner away from the others. I guess you have some free time now. Of course I had to come since it is to see you, young Master Kale. Taylor Stan and the crazy priestess Cage. The two of them came to find Kale with some alcohol and drinking glasses. They came to see him late at night, so Kale ended up drinking and eating at the same time. I will probably get busier after today. Naturally so. Kale nodded at Taylor's words and looked toward Cage. She smiled and lifted up the bottle. Kale emptied the entire glass without any changes to his expression. The majority of the people you told us about were Vinian's people, young Master Kale. Is that so? Taylor could not look at Kale comfortably. Kale had given him the file regarding Vinian's bases and the involved people. That alone was surprising, but there was an even more surprising development. There were some of my father's people as well. I did not know that. Kale looked toward Taylor with a sincerely shocked expression. But of course, he was just acting. Vinian had received orders from Marquis Stan to torture the Black Dragon. Thanks to that, the people guarding the cave were naturally going to include some of Marquis Stan's people. A couple of them were connected to Vinian's dirty deeds. They would receive a life sentence at minimum and be executed at maximum. The Stan territory had the most vicious rules after all. The Marquis would probably want to kill them all so that he could try to hide his involvement. I will trust that you didn't know. Taylor answered like he was convincing himself. A bottle was placed between the two of them. How about we empty this bottle first? Sure. Let's drink. Sounds good. The three people took turns filling each other's glasses and emptied the bottle. Taylor and Cage had to return to work as the bottle emptied out. Will you be leaving tomorrow? Yes. I heard you are taking the western route to the capital. Is the capital your final destination? Taylor could see Cale starting to smile instead of answering his question. Taylor did not ask further. Instead, he shared his sentiments with Cale. I will definitely pay you back for your help in this situation, as well as last time. I look forward to it. Yes, please look forward to it. Seeing Taylor looking straight into his eyes as he told Cale to look forward to it, Cale thought about the new connections he had in this northwest region. Taylor and Odious. He had quite a few people to put to use in the approaching future. Cale finished all of his preparations early the next morning and was looking in the mirror. He asked Rayon, who was looking in the mirror as well. Have you figured out the Crown Prince's magic? I know what it is, human. I am great and mighty. There was a smile on Cale's face as he continued to look into the mirror. Chapter 88, I suppose it is a gift, 1. Cale, who was coming out of the bedroom and heading to the back door, ran into Odious. Odious, very satisfactory performance. Odious didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Cale's comment. However, based on the results of everything, he had only happiness on his mind. No, the pleasure was mine. I am very happy about the overflowing benefit I gained. I'm sure. Cale didn't even play along to say that the fee Odious received was small. The deal was for Cale to get rid of Venian from the southern underworld after all. I'll contact you next time. Odious did not want to see Cale ever again. His instincts that he had built up through his long life were telling him that it was dangerous and that he would suffer greatly. However, his vast experience was also telling him that it was unavoidable. He will have no choice but to see him again. Of course. I will let you know where I am every so often. Good. Cale got on the carriage with Beacrox in the driver's seat. The driver who had brought the carriage to the Stan territory had already returned. Odious. Yes, sir. You know what to do with the basement, right? Odious's eyes slightly shook. He looked toward where the entrance to the basement near the back door used to be. Now it was just a pile of rubble. I will take care of everything properly. Good. Odious had seen the remains of the feast as well as the broken torture devices in the basement before it was destroyed. Total bullshit about him being a good person. There were no good nobles with a strong sense of self-sacrifice. They were all vicious and sly. And I don't want you to tell Billows about what happened. Secrets are the life of such commissions. Yes, I know. It definitely is the main part. Both of them started to gently smile at each other. However, neither of them was smiling internally. Then, off I go. Please have a safe journey. Odious's goodbye was very sincere, like he wanted to never see Cale again. Cale smirked at Odious's goodbye and closed the carriage door. Beacrox started to drive as soon as the door closed. The carriage left the Stan territory and headed toward the kingdom's western region. They continued to quickly travel other than resting during the night. Bored. Cale, who had been looking out the window, turned his head after hearing Choi Han's gentle voice. Choi Han's unique pure smile was on his face as he was handing on and Hong some snacks. No. Not bored. I enjoy rolling around doing nothing the most. Choi Han laughed and responded back. You guys really are similar to Cale Nim. Is he talking shit about me? Cale focused on Choi Han after hearing what could be both a compliment or a dig and then turned his gaze to An and Hong. The carriage was currently between the Roan Kingdom's northwest and southwest region. Basically, they were currently in the western region of the kingdom. If the northeastern region where the Henitus territory lies was famous for its marble, the northwest to the west region was famous for their granite. That was why there were a lot of stone mountains in this region. Choi Han continued to speak. I came here last time too, but there really is nothing other than stone mountains. Choi Han passed through here before. Kale questioned that fact in his mind before quickly figuring it out. Rosalind. He probably passed through here when he went to the Breck Kingdom with Locke to help Rosalind out. Did you pass by when you went to the Breck Kingdom? Kale had an odd feeling after seeing Choi Han's reaction to his question. Seeing Choi Han hesitating to answer gave him a bitter feeling. Kale continued to speak like nothing was wrong. Did you cause a mess in the Breck Kingdom? It wasn't like that. Kale did not ask anything else. He did not want to know. It was enough that he heard the results of it from Crown Prince Elberu. However, there was something else he needed to ask. Did you pass by the 10-Finger Mountain when you went through the west? Is there a mountain with such a name? I have never heard it before. An, Hong, and Rayon seemed interested in the unique name as well. Their sparkling gazes asking Kale to explain made Kale scowl. Tap. Rayon put his paw on Kale's knee. Human, explain. I am curious. In the end, Kale had to explain. There are many strong rocks called granite in the west. However, not everything is made of such rocks. Still, at the border of the west and southwest region are 10 granite peaks next to each other. These granite peaks were located at the border of the west and southwest and had a unique shape that looked like 10 fingers. I don't think we saw it last time because we cut through the northwest and not the southwest region. It was the same when we came back. I'm sure I would have remembered seeing such a mountain. Really? I was curious because they said it was a unique view from there. Rayon responded to Kale's answer about being curious. Rayon remembered how Kale told Latana that he enjoyed traveling. Rayon opened his mouth to say, let's go there right now. However, Kale was faster. I thought about going there in about a year. That was why I asked. A year later? Yes. Kale definitely had to go to the 10-Finger Mountains in 1 year. The last ancient power will reveal itself there. Kale needed to get this final ancient power, an attacking fire ancient power that was similar to lightning. I thought it'd be great if we all traveled together. Kale nonchalantly mumbled that line, but his words made the fatigue on An, Hong, and Rayon's face all disappear. Choi Han also had a small smile on his face. Yes, that sounds good. But there probably aren't any villages near there. Why wouldn't there dash? No, there aren't any. Kale looked toward Choi Han and the children and sternly repeated himself. There are none. Based on my knowledge, there are no villages around there. None at all. At least when it came to human villages. The problem was that there was a village of elves who passionately loved nature and almost worshipped dragons. Elves. They were a magical race that used illusion magic to hide their village and lived away from humans. They were the race that was closest to nature after the dragons. That was why they were able to handle elementals and had a beauty that was admired by all humans. They were different than the dark elves who were just as beautiful but had the darkness element instead. In the novel, Choi Han passes through the 10-Finger Mountains with Locke on their way back from dealing with the issues in the Breck Kingdom. They coincidentally happen to find the elf village and get involved with one elf. Pendrick the Healer. Unlike Kale's restoration abilities, the elf Pendrick had the ability to heal others. He joins Choi Han's group and starts to travel with them. Fantasy worlds always seem to have at least one elf in the main character's party. That was Pendrick in this novel. The problem is that he ends up dying. The original point of Locke's berserk transformation was Pendrick's death. He died while Locke was protecting him, and that results in Locke going berserk for the first time. It also changes Locke's personality as well. That meant that Pendrick should not die if he does not meet Locke or travel with Choi Han's party. They already missed the moment to run into each other. Pendrick had not had any interactions with Kale, Choi Han, or Locke until now. If 1 year passes like this, Pendrick would have lived longer than he had lived in the novel. It could be considered the biggest change in the flow of the original novel. Yes, there are no villages. Kale mumbled once more and made up his mind. He told himself that he would avoid the elf village when he went to the 10-Finger Mountains next year. He had taken on too much baggage by not thinking things through and just doing whatever he thought was the easiest for him. Kale was not going to let the same thing happen again next year. I want it to be next year already. I do not care if there are no villages. Kale looked toward Rayon, who seemed to be excited. He definitely could not take a dragon to the elf village. He would be treated like a god. Thinking about that was already giving Kale the chills. Kale quickly turned away from Rayon. He strongly reminded himself that he would not even take a step into the western region until he returns a year later with the Crown Prince's golden plaque to find the last ancient power. Kale opened the small window toward the driver's seat and spoke to Beecrox. "Let's speed it up a bit." "Yes, sir." The carriage quickly drove through the western region and arrived at the capital. "It has been too long, Your Highness." The gently smiling Kale, who was wearing a simple yet stylish outfit, would catch anybody's attention. "Yes. I am glad to see you again. How was your recovery?" Blonde hair and blue eyes. Alberu, who was just as handsome as Kale, smiled brightly as he hugged Kale. They were currently in front of the Crown Prince's palace. Crown Prince Alberu was warmly welcoming the hero of the now-famed Plaza terror incident. Although people didn't talk about it much anymore, the plaza was still being rebuilt and had knights patrolling around it. There were also many who were upset with the palace for not revealing the identity of the terrorists. "I was able to rest well and recover thanks to Your Highness's concerns and the royal family's generosity." Kale, who was smiling like he was telling the truth, definitely looked healthy. Crown Prince Alberu looked at him like he was happy that Kale had recovered and then pointed to the inside of the palace. "Come on in. I should at least give you some tea since you've come to visit after such a long time." "Yes, Your Highness. I'm sure you are busy with work, so I will only take a bit of your time. I don't know why you do this every time." Kale had the same thoughts, but there was nothing he could do. Click. The moment they entered Alberu's office and closed the door, both Kale and Alberu, who had been walking close to each other, quickly moved away. "Your Highness, you must be tired. I'm sure you feel the same way." Alberu sighed before pointing to a table on one side of the office. However, he noticed that Kale had always walked over there and sat down on what seemed to be the most comfortable couch. "People will think you've been here a couple of times." "It is my first time here, but I feel like it is very welcoming." Kale had no problem using that glib tongue of his. Alberu looked toward Kale, who sat on the couch of his choice while keeping the seat at the head of the table open for him, and sat down. "I thought I told you to come as quickly as possible. That is why I cut into my sleeping time to rush here, Your Highness." Alberu snorted at Kale's response. He didn't know what Kale had been up to, but the person who was supposed to be in the northeastern Henadus territory had come in from the west. And he knew exactly what had happened in the west, no, the northwest region right now. "You are a very suspicious person." Alberu took a sip of the tea that his servant brought over and just quietly observed Kale until the servant left the room. There was quite a lot for him to discuss with Kale today. He also had a lot of requests for Kale as well. The Crown Prince has a sneaky look on his face. Kale agreed with Rayon's assessment and pretended not to notice Alberu's gaze. The gaze was one that seemed to want to take a lot from him today, however, that thought and their relationship will go the opposite way. Click. The servant left the office with a small click of the door. Alberu was about to speak, but there was someone who started to speak even faster. "Your Highness." "Huh?" Kale made eye contact with Alberu, who seemed confused. Rayon was speaking in his mind as he did that. "After dealing with both things, I am now certain. He really is an odd existence." Kale took a magic bag out of his pocket. "I have prepared a present for you." "For me?" "Yes, for the star on the minds of our kingdoms. Enough." Alberu was not happy at hearing that Kale had a present for him. In fact, he looked toward Kale with even more suspicion. It was because of the things that had happened with Kale up to this point. However, he could not lie and say that there was no anticipation in his mind at hearing about a present. A few weeks ago, Alberu had already received one of Kale's so-called presents under one of the Flynn Merchant Guild's people. Let's first take a look at this present. Kale slowly opened the magic bag with Alberu's permission. Rayon's voice rang in Kale's mind as he took a small glass bottle out of the bag. "He has a darkness attribute." Tap. The glass bottle was placed on the table. "What is this?" Kale showed with his actions instead of answering. Squeak, squeak. The lid of the glass bottle slowly opened. This small glass bottle was full of black water. The lid opened completely, and an invisible substance slowly started to come out of the bottle. I am used to this smell. I smelled it in the black swamp. The scent of the dead mana slowly started to fill the room. This was one of the items he received from the Whale King on their way to the Whipper Kingdom. Unlike Kale's other bottle, this bottle only had dead mana with no poison in it. 1/3 of what he received from the Whale King was in this small bottle. Kale slowly closed the lid back while seeing that Alberu could not continue to speak. Your Highness, of course, this present is not free. There was no way Kale would give something so precious for free. It was poison for humans and not precious at all. However, Kale remembered what Rayon had said about Alberu the last time they were here. Why did this puny human called the Crown Prince dye his hair with magic? It is at a level that only a great dragon like me can notice. Did another dragon dye it for him? No, is it a different type of power? A different type of power. Rayon was able to tell that it was different than natural mana because he was a dragon, but he was not sure of exactly what it was. It made sense because Rayon had never experienced it before. However, he had experienced it now. Dead mana. Kale mumbled like he was talking to himself. Probably not a demon, black magic, or a necromancer. Dead mana. It was used by those with the darkness attribute to use magic. Of course, it was very different than regular mana. Magic devices that were made to detect mana could not detect dead mana. Especially if the dead mana was used by a high-tiered race. I heard that the late queen was an average person, but that people thought she was part southerner because her skin was a bit dark. Rayon mentioned that the crown prince had regular brown hair. His hair and eyes were regular, but Alberu was known for his looks. People also said that the crown prince's mother was a beauty as well. Dark elves have dark skin, but I heard that a mixed child of a dark elf has skin similar to the southerners. Kale looked toward Alberu and finished his deduction. So then, the child of a half-blooded dark elf. The crown prince answered more confidently than Kale expected. You're driving me crazy. I guess I was right. Chapter 89. I suppose it is a gift, too. Kale and Alberu both just quietly observed each other. And the crown prince's response at the end of that silence was pretty confident. His face was not shaking at all. Kale shrugged his shoulders. Just that I can give this to you, but not for free. Alberu couldn't believe Kale had nothing else to say after giving him such a strong blow. Ha, ha ha dash. Alberu started to laugh. It made Kale wonder what would have happened if there wasn't soundproof magic in the office. Either that, or what would have happened if he hadn't sent the servants and his subordinates out. The atmosphere turned chilly in the room. I was planning on putting you to work. I shouldn't have told you to come. Alberu was tired of that mug on Kale's face that was as relaxed as usual. His gaze headed toward the bottle with the black liquid. Mother. The weight of that word pierced into Alberu's heart. Kale did not say anything else and just sat there observing the crown prince, who was staring at the bottle. Dark elf. They were creatures of the dark that were chastised by the people of the continent because of their affinity to darkness. The base of their power was the dead mana flowing out of the dead. In the past, dark elves tended to be found near graves or villages that were destroyed by illnesses. That was why people hated dark elves, even though the dark elves never harmed people nor desecrated corpses. This led to the dark elves living in hiding. They were hiding even better than the elves. Alberu moved his gaze from the glass bottle and looked toward Kale. Kale just smiled back at him. And you'll keep your mouth shut? Of course. But not for free. Naturally. Alberu spoke his honest feelings. You sly bastard. Why thank you. Alberu hated how Kale didn't even flinch at what he said. At the same time, he was relieved as well. Kale had come directly to him instead of going to the favored third prince or the second prince who were aiming for his position. It meant that Kale wanted to make a deal with him. That was why he was relieved. It was because Kale was similar to him. However, he did have a question. Are you really not one of us? How could Kale know his identity if he was not a dark elf as well? Alberu could not figure this out. The only people who knew his identity were his mother's siblings. They had helped him so that his father, the king, would not find out his mother's identity. They were all on Alberu's side. Kale pointed to the glass bottle and answered Alberu's question. I will die if I drink that. Dead mana was like an extremely deadly poison for humans. Do not worry, human. This mighty dragon will save you no matter what. Kale just ignored Rayon as usual and pushed the glass bottle toward Alberu. Don't you need it? Alberu came clean with it. Of course, it is good if I have it. It will make me stronger. It is clean as well. There are no traces of poison. Of course. It is a very precious item. Kale continued on like what he said next was not surprising. Since it is a dead dragon's mana. What? Alberu could not hide his shock. He then let out a sigh after seeing the smile on Kale's face. You're driving me crazy. Alberu was not speaking like how someone in his position should, but he did not really want to do so today. Instead, he was speaking in the way he spoke to his mother's siblings. You really have no plans to say anything about my identity. It was difficult to find dead mana these days. But it was a dragon's dead mana. Of course, the amount of dead mana in the glass bottle was minimal. However, the fact that it was a dragon's dead mana would make Alberu become at least 3 or 4 times stronger than he was right now. Alberu could not understand why Kale would give him something so precious, even for a compensation. He thought Kale was someone similar to him, but now it was difficult to understand Kale. Why are you asking something so obvious? Alberu was at a loss of words after hearing Kale say that it was obvious. However, it really was the obvious answer for Kale. The Roan Kingdom needs to become stronger. If you took a look at the power struggle between kingdoms right now, the Breck Kingdom and Roan Kingdom were at the bottom. The Whipper Kingdom was on a one-way train to hell under Tunka's leadership, but they were a different story. At the same time, the southern jungle was slowly regaining its strength after putting out the fire earlier than in the novel. They all probably respected Latana even more after she brought Kale to the southern jungle to put out the fire. In addition, the Northern Alliance was planning their invasion as well. Alberu was gathering the Whipper Kingdom's mages in order to grow his own influence and prepare for the Northern Alliance's invasion. However, that was not enough. There is also the Wyvern Knights Brigade and the Empire. Kale did not know what happened after Volume 5. However, people had this treasure called imagination. It's obvious. The Wyvern Knights Brigade would dominate the air. Once the Imperial Prince shows his greed and reaches his hand out to the Western continent, the Breck Kingdom and Roan Kingdom will be nothing but candles in front of the wind. That was why Kale needed the Roan Kingdom to become stronger and have the strength to defend itself in order for him to live a peaceful life. In order to do that, they needed a strong leader to guide them. Since it is poisonous for me, I might as well use it to set a good foundation. But Kale did not want them to be too strong either. The Crown Prince was already stronger than he was in the novel. The Stan family was now also under Taylor's control, which meant that they would side with the Crown Prince. One more thing. Kale said one more thing to Alberu. Did you need the magic tower? It must be hard to speak like that when you already know about everything. The number of mages coming under the Crown Prince, as well as the speed at which they were coming, had increased. The magic tower's liege's summoning device. That was very useful. Kale had given Alberu one of the items he found in the hidden room on the 21st floor of the magic tower. It was an item that belonged to the liege of the tower, allowing the holder to send multiple short messages to all mages of the Whipper Kingdom. The magic tower's liege was the person who rose to the highest spot amongst the Whipper Kingdom's mages and guarded the magic tower. It wouldn't make sense for such a person to be unable to contact the mages. Tunka and his people never found the item because it was hidden on the 21st floor. Kale had delivered this to Alberu through Billows, and Alberu immediately sent a single message to all of the living mages in the Whipper Kingdom. The Kingdom of Boulder's future ruler will protect you. Alberu, who had benefited a lot from it, wished for Kale to either move the magic tower to somewhere in the Roan Kingdom or to restore it. However, he was not in a place to ask for such a thing anymore. I don't think I can give you an order or command. Maybe a request. I do not have a plan to restore the magic tower. Alberu knew that was what Kale would say. That was why he was trying to slowly convince Kale, since he knew that Kale did not like annoying things. However, I can eventually give you a part of the blueprints to build the magic tower. Alberu brushed his face with his hands. What do you want? Alberu knew that there was no reason to beat around the bush anymore. He was not in control of this discussion right now. I need something to happen in 2 years. Cale knew that he needed status in addition to money in order to live that slacker life of his dreams. Why was it great to be a slacker? It was because you didn't need to worry about anybody else other than your family. Cale didn't want to live a life where he had to report to others. It didn't matter if he was seen as trash, he just wanted to live however he wanted. Eat, sleep, and do nothing. How great would that be? Cale could see Alberu's expression change as he read the contents of the document. Alberu was looking at it with confusion before his expression turned into a frown and ended with shock as he looked back up at Cale. Just what the hell is this? Cale had a short answer for Alberu. I believe that is for you to determine, Your Highness. Sigh. Alberu could not help but sigh. However, Cale was able to leave the office with the contract signed by Alberu. I've never felt so iffy after signing something that was beneficial to me. I believe you just need to enjoy it since it is a win-win for both of us, Your Highness. It definitely was a win for the Crown Prince. Cale would keep his identity a secret, give him the bottle of a dragon's dead mana, as well as a portion of the Magic Tower's blueprint in a few years. He was feeling iffy even though he had received this enormous profit that had a worth that was almost impossible to evaluate in monetary value. It was because Cale was smiling too much. It was like he was on a field of flowers all by himself. Then I will be on my way, Your Highness. Hurry up and leave. Alberu was telling Cale to leave, but he really didn't want to send Cale away. He wanted to hold Cale here and beat some information out of him. However, he could not do so. The Forest of Darkness, the northwestern route, and the sea. Alberu could not figure out Cale's intentions in asking for something that was neither money nor material goods. On the other hand, Cale did not care whether the Crown Prince knew or not. He quickly got back on his carriage after accomplishing his reason for coming to the capital. There was no reason for him to stay in the capital any longer. Are we heading back to the Hennetis territory, sir? Yes. Beacrox closed the carriage door and immediately started to drive toward home. Human, are we going home to rest now? Yes. I plan to rest for quite a while this time. Cale answered Rayon's question and leaned back into the chair. He should be able to roll around and do nothing for at least 6 months at minimum to a year at maximum. Then, as long as he safely makes it through the war, what awaits him should be a nice and relaxing slacker's life. However, Cale noticed something was off as soon as they returned home. What is going on? That, you see, young Master Nim. Deputy Butler Hans was naturally the one who came out to greet Cale. But something was off. Hans seemed worried. Hurry up and tell me. Cale did not look at Choi Han, Beacrox, An, and Hong who were behind him and instead only looked at Hans. He had a bad feeling. An ominous feeling filled his mind. Am I not going to be able to rest? Something must have happened, as the other servants and knights around Hans had the same expression. Cale's mind became complicated in those short 5 seconds. Young Master Nim, Mr. Ron has returned. Ron did. My father. Both Cale and Ron's son, Beacrox, looked toward Hans with shock. Ron was not supposed to be back for a couple more months. Hans then closed his eyes tightly. That made Cale have an even worse feeling. Hans opened his eyes again and could not look at Beacrox as he continued to speak. Mr. Ron came back injured. Lead me there. Hans, who saw Cale's stiff expression, quickly turned around and guided them into the residence. Cale followed him with Beacrox right next to him. Hans guided Cale as quickly as possible and stopped in front of a room. It was not Ron's room but a luxurious bedroom that was reserved for high-ranking guests. Open the door. Yes, sir. Hans opened the door after hearing Cale's stern command. Creak. The door opened and a terrible rotting smell filled Cale's nose. Young Master Nim. Cale stiffened up for the first time since coming over to this world. Ron. The assassin Ron, that sly old man, was laying on the bed. Father. Beacrox rushed past Cale into the bedroom. Cale looked into Ron's eyes and asked. Ron, why is your arm like that? Ron had returned earlier than expected and one of his arms had been cut off. Chapter 90, I suppose it is a gift, 3. I somehow ended up like this. Ron's benign smile was the same as always. However, his face was pale and full of small injuries. The rotting smell also got stronger as Cale got closer. His left arm, starting from the shoulder area, was missing. Hans. Yes, sir. Get out. Excuse me. Cale looked at Hans, as well as the estate staff and his father, subordinate, before clarifying. Everybody except Beacrox and Choi Han, get out. Hans hesitated for a moment, but quickly took everyone out of the room after seeing the expression on Cale's face. Even An and Hong slowly moved back after seeing Cale's gaze. Meow. Meow. The baby kittens An and Hong looked at Ron multiple times with anxious expressions before heading out of the bedroom. The bedroom looked much bigger after those people left. Do you have enough strength to speak? Cale's calm question floated toward Ron. Ron had a gentle smile on his face and did not seem to be hurting at all. Yes, young Master Nim. Then explain. How did you return like this when you went to hunt some foxes? Ron turned away from Cale and looked toward his son, Beacrox. Beacrox was on his knees by the bed, looking toward Ron's empty shoulder. Maybe I shouldn't have come back. But this was the only place that came to his mind. If he was going to die, he wanted to see his son and a couple other people one last time. I came across from the eastern continent. It was when Beacrox was very young. Ron started his story. He needed someone who would take care of his son. As you already know, I am an assassin. The eastern continent's underworld has 5 famous assassin families. One of them was our family, the Mullen family, and I was groomed to become the next head of household. Father. Beacrox called out to Ron. Our family was destroyed by an organization called ARM. Everybody else died while I managed to avoid them and escape over to Western Continent with my son. I had been hiding my identity in order to survive. Sigh. Ron let out a deep sigh. His face was very pale. It was because, although this organization called ARM rules the underworld, they were just a low-ranking organization. The core of their operation was elsewhere. I felt fear from the strength of this organization that was beyond what I could even fathom. That was why I have been living as a lowly servant. 1. Ron started to frown. But I caught onto their scent for the first time in tens of years. Beacrox flinched. Ron's gaze headed past Cale to Choi Han, who was standing there with a look of disbelief. The scent of ARM was on this twisted yet good bastard. Choi Han had the scent of ARM on him when he first came to our castle. That was the reason Ron and Beacrox had attacked Choi Han when he first came over from Harris Village. He had the scent of ARM on him. Choi Han's pupils started to shake. Then the assassins I killed in Harris Village? Yes, there is a good chance they were from ARM. Choi Han looked toward Cale as Ron continued to speak. I was able to figure out that they were stretching their reaches to the Western Continent when I went and investigated in the capital. It was more like a dog walking into a tiger's den than hunting foxes. Ron wondered what gave him the confidence to go attack them, but knew that he would have done the same thing if he had the choice again. He needed to know what they were planning to do. While I was looking around, I ran into one of ARM's attack squads and figured out what they were doing. He managed to get a bit of information after destroying that attack squad. However, I then somehow ended up losing my left arm and barely managed to escape with my life. 2. Ron had a bitter smile on his face. He was a mess. For someone who practiced a double daggers style that used both hands, this was a severe hit to his strength. At that moment, Cale, who had been listening quietly, started to speak. So you were not able to determine the identity of this organization called ARM? Unfortunately, no. Ron was not any closer to that information than before. Ron looked toward Cale, whose aura had increased while they were apart. He felt a sense of pressure that made him want to bow. Who cut off your arm? It was a young mage who seemed to be cutting the arms of all enemies. Choi Han flinched and looked toward Cale. Crazy bastard. Some harsh words were coming out of Cale's mouth. ARM was probably the secret organization that Cale knew about. This was the organization responsible for the attack on Harris Village, the ones to give Rayon over to the Marquis, the perpetrators for the capital's Plaza terror incident, and the attack on the Blue Wolf tribe. Furthermore, Cale felt like he knew the person who cut off Ron's arm as well. Choi Han probably knew him too. The mage that led the Plaza Terror incident. There was a good chance it was the blood-crazy mage, Retica. He had lost his left arm and left eye thanks to Choi Han. Kale didn't know how Retica was able to cast magic with one hand and cut off people's arms, but there was a good chance that it was Retica. How could something like this happen? Choi Han seemed to be in a state of chaos as he stood there with his fists clenched. However, there was something else Kale needed to verify. Ron was strong and his specialties were assassination and stealth. He was stronger than Retica. There had to be a reason Ron got his arm chopped off and had to run away. What is this rotting smell? Kale needed to figure out the identity of this rotting smell that was filling the room. It was the smell of rotting flesh. Ron smiled instead of answering the question. That smile made Kale frustrated and he immediately walked over and pulled off the blanket covering Ron. Ah. Choi Han let out a gasp and Beacrox started to frown. I was hit by some poison. Ron's thigh and torso were slowly turning black due to poison. There was a slimy fluid on it as well. Choi Han had never seen something like this before. However, Kale had seen it before. Mermaid poison. Ron looked toward Kale. They were the ones who were helping the mermaids. Kale sighed as he came to that revelation. He covered his eyes with his hand. To be honest, he had suspected this. He had suspected that the secret organization was involved when the whales first told him about the Forest of Darkness. It only made his suspicions stronger when they found that the ingredients from the Forest of Darkness had made the mermaids stronger. However, he chose not to think about it. Why? Because it was annoying. He also didn't want to get involved with them. If he somehow ended up finding out their identity, he needed to tell Choi Han. That would complicate things even further. That was why he just decided to let it go. It had nothing to do with his future safety. Damn bastards. But he wouldn't let them run wild in his territory. He didn't like this assassin Ron. However, seeing him like this made Kale realize something. Ron was someone under his command. Kale, actually, Kim Rock-soo, was oddly affectionate to those under his command. It was because he was only able to survive thanks to the help he received from others. Beacrox, Ron, and even Choi Han could not say anything after seeing this angry expression on Kale's face. They had never seen such a look on Kale's face before. Kale put the blanket back onto Ron's body. Is it the ocean? It is an island. There were many islands between the western and eastern continents. Choi Han. Yes, sir. Kale looked toward Choi Han, who could not take his eyes off of Ron's arm. It was because he was feeling guilty. He felt that the reason that the blood-crazy mage Retica had done this was because of what he had done to Retica. What are you doing? He had to turn his gaze away after hearing Kale's voice. Kale then continued to speak. Stop thinking about useless things and go call Mueller over. Useless things. Choi Han knew that Kale had realized what he was thinking and bit down on his lips. I just need to go bring Mr. Mueller. Yeah. Tell him to grab the blueprint for the ship and hurry over. Kale was not showing any anger. He just gave the order with indifference. However, Choi Han left faster than ever as he left the bedroom. Ron was confused that Kale was suddenly talking about a ship. Young Master Nim. Kale's indifference continued as he responded to Ron. You will go with me as well. Be prepared. He then started to grumble a bit. How can an assassin come back injured? I am still alive. Kale recalled the contents of Ron's messages to him. Kale let out a sigh. That mouth of yours is still alive at least. Beacrox. Yes, sir. Beacrox responded without any energy. Kale put his hand on Beacrox's shoulder. Hurry up and go repack our bags. Grab everyone as well. Kale's next words made Beacrox quickly turn his head around and look at Kale. We need to at least get rid of the mermaid poison. The mermaid poison had the darkness attribute and there was no known cure. Beacrox, who specialized in torture and assassinations, knew this better than anybody else. It was the same for Ron. That was the reason why he came to see his son. He returned home, to his second hometown, to see his son one last time before he died. It was thanks to Ron's immunity to many poisons as well as the highest grade potions from Count Deruth that were preventing his flesh from drying up and the poison from spreading elsewhere. The highest grade potion was allowing him to have some strength while feeling no pain. It was only possible because the Hennitus family was wealthy. There is a way to cure him. Beacrox, the usually prim and proper man, stuttered. Cale repeated his order very clearly. Move quickly. It was something that Rosalind was supposed to figure out in the novel, but Cale had already used it once to save Payston. Don't worry. Your father still has many years to live. Although Cale said it jokingly, it did not feel that way. Contrary to his words, Cale's expression was stiffer than ever. Damn it. It wasn't that he was angry because he would not get to rest. It was because things were moving in an unexpected direction. The novel did not have a situation like this. Ron started to speak once Beacrox left and it was just the two of them. Young Master Nim. What? They, seemed to be aiming for the sea route with the mermaids. Ron shared the important information that he had barely managed to obtain with Cale. Cale immediately responded. I know. Excuse me. It's obvious. It was obvious. It was even more obvious once Cale heard that they had come over from the eastern continent. Ron, I know it is hard, but can I ask you one more thing? Yes, of course. Did anyone see your face? Only that mage. Ron did not look happy as he shared this fail as an assassin. On the other hand, Cale's eyes became cloudy. Young Master Nim. You're not going to go to war against that organization, are you? What do you think? Ron was struggling with the poison, but started to smile. He could see what Cale was planning to do. I'm sure it will all work out to your benefit. You know me very well. Cale was not planning to do anything that would complicate his life. He was going to achieve his goal and then quickly run. Of course, he planned to cause a ruckus before he left. Cale could hear Rayon's voice in his head. Rayon was angry. Weak human, do not worry. Cale knew that he, a high school student who was transported to this world, did not have the strength to do something like that. Annoying bastards. The secret organization, and the mermaids were both probably very strong. It would be difficult to go to war against them. However, the great Rayon will be with you. Cale at least had a very good sense of Rayon, Choi-Han, Rosalind, and all of the others' levels of strength. He quickly formulated a plan. He needed to come up with a plan to protect himself as well as the people around him. That was the only way for his body and mind to be relaxed in the future. Rest until we leave. Cale left the bedroom Ron was in and immediately headed to the video communication room. He needed to head to the northeastern shoreline. He needed to go to the Abar territory.